The cruelest part wasn't that Ryan Mitchell lost his job. It was that the woman sitting in his chair, the one everyone now stood to applaud, was the same wife whose ideas he had interrupted at the dinner table just 2 nights before. For 12 years, Ryan believed he was the natural leader. Jasmine believed she didn't need to prove otherwise. She simply kept solving problems no one noticed she had already fixed. He called her supportive. The board called her indispensable. He thought he was protecting the company. They believed she already was. And on a quiet Thursday morning, with one vote that changed everything, Ryan discovered something far more painful than losing his title. He had spent years loving a woman he never truly respected. By the time he realized her value, the entire company already knew it. Some marriages don't fall apart because of betrayal. Some slowly wear down beneath thousands of ordinary moments. A suggestion brushed aside because someone assumes they'll have another chance to listen. A thank you left unsaid because appreciation becomes routine. A partner's quiet strength mistaken for simple agreement. That was Ryan and Jasmine Mitchell. From the outside, they looked like the kind of couple people admired. They lived in Charlotte, North Carolina, shared a beautiful home, worked together at Mitchell Freight Solutions, attended neighborhood gatherings, remembered birthdays, and rarely argued in public. Friends described them as successful. Co-workers envied the ease with which they seemed to balance marriage and business. But appearances often hide habits that become invisible to the people living them. Ryan wasn't a cruel husband. He wasn't controlling. He never insulted Jasmine or tried to stop her from building a career. His mistake was quieter than that. Whenever an important decision had to be made, he instinctively believed his judgment should come first. Whenever Jasmine offered another perspective, he listened just long enough to believe he understood before explaining why his way made more sense. He wasn't trying to silence her. He simply never noticed that he did. Jasmine carried her own imperfections. She had spent much of her life believing that keeping the peace was more valuable than being fully heard. Instead of challenging Ryan every time he overlooked her insight, she often let the conversation move on. She told herself it wasn't worth another argument. Over time, those small moments accumulated into quiet disappointment, not enough to destroy their marriage, but enough to leave her emotionally tired. She still loved Ryan. She still believed he was a good man. She just wasn't sure he truly saw the woman standing beside him. Neither of them entered their marriage intending to become strangers in certain parts of each other's lives. Like many couples, they slowly developed patterns they stopped questioning. Until one ordinary business decision forced them to see everything they had been missing. This isn't a story about revenge. It isn't about one spouse defeating the other. It's about 2 imperfect people discovering that love without respect eventually grows heavy, and that healing doesn't begin when someone wins. It begins when both people are finally willing to see each other clearly. The alarm rang at 5:45 a.m., just as it had every weekday for years. Ryan Mitchell reached over, silenced it without opening his eyes, and lay still for a few seconds. His body wasn't exhausted, but his mind already felt crowded. The quarterly board meeting was that morning, followed by a meeting with investors and another with regional managers. It would be another long day at Mitchell Freight Solutions, the logistics company his father had built from a single warehouse into one of the fastest-growing freight businesses in the Southeast. Beside him, Jasmine was already awake. She sat against the headboard with a tablet resting on her lap, reading through overnight reports while a mug of tea cooled on the nightstand. The soft glow from the screen illuminated her thoughtful expression. "Morning," Ryan mumbled. She smiled warmly. "Morning? You've been working already?" "Just checking the distribution reports from Memphis. One of the overnight routes ran into weather delays." Ryan stretched before sitting up. "I'm sure operations has it handled." "They do," Jasmine replied. "But there might be a bigger issue." Ryan stood and walked toward the bathroom. "We'll figure it out at the office." It wasn't dismissive in his mind. It was efficient. He believed there would be time later. There always seemed to be. By 7 o'clock, they were driving together through downtown Charlotte. The city was beginning to wake. Coffee shops filled with commuters. Delivery trucks lined busy intersections. Construction crews prepared another high-rise for a skyline that seemed to change every year. Ryan drove while Jasmine reviewed notes on her tablet. "The weather delay exposed another problem," she said quietly. Ryan kept his eyes on the road. "What kind?" "Our Tennessee warehouse has been operating above capacity for 3 months." "I know. I think it's time to redistribute inventory." Ryan nodded. "We've talked about that. I think we need to do it this week." Ryan hesitated. The board probably won't like changing the distribution strategy this close to the quarterly report. It could prevent larger delays. "They'll understand once we explain it." She looked out the window. Waiting could cost more. Ryan gave her a quick smile. "You always worry before everyone else." She smiled politely. "And you're usually right." It sounded like a compliment. But nothing changed. The conversation quietly ended. Mitchell Freight Solutions occupied 12 floors of a modern glass building overlooking Charlotte's business district. Employees greeted Ryan the moment he stepped inside. "Good morning, Mr. Mitchell." "Morning, sir." "Board meeting starts in 40 minutes. Ryan smiled confidently. He genuinely liked people. He remembered birthdays. He congratulated employees when children graduated. He donated generously to local charities. Most people considered him approachable. What many employees quietly noticed, however, was something Ryan himself never saw. Whenever complicated operational problems appeared, someone eventually asked Jasmine. She entered the building moments later. "Good morning, Ms. Mitchell." "Morning, Claire." "Morning, Marcus." Unlike Ryan, Jasmine stopped walking every few feet. She asked a receptionist how her son's college orientation had gone. She congratulated an accountant on finishing his MBA. She thanked a maintenance employee for staying late during the previous week's storm. None of it felt rehearsed. She simply remembered people. As she reached the executive floor, Operations Director Miguel Alvarez hurried toward her. "I've been looking for you." She noticed the concern in his face. "What happened?" "The Memphis delays are spreading faster than expected." She didn't panic. "Conference room?" Miguel nodded. Within minutes, several department managers gathered around a digital logistics map. Red warning markers spread across 3 states. Jasmine listened before speaking. "What have we already tried?" Each manager explained. She asked questions, not because she doubted them, because she wanted the full picture. No interruptions, no assumptions. When everyone finished, she quietly said, "Let's reroute Louisville shipments through Nashville temporarily." One manager frowned. "That adds mileage." "It does. But it avoids 48 hours of warehouse congestion." Another manager looked at the projections. "That actually works." Miguel smiled. "I'll coordinate it." Jasmine nodded. "And notify customer service before drivers leave." Everyone immediately began working. No applause, no speeches, just solutions. Meanwhile, Ryan was preparing for the board meeting. His executive assistant entered. "The board packet is ready." "Perfect." "Oh, Mrs. Mitchell requested a few updated warehouse projections." Ryan looked surprised. "For today?" "Yes." He shrugged. "I'm sure she'll explain whatever she added." To him, it wasn't unusual. Jasmine always improved presentations. He appreciated it. He just rarely thought about why she needed to. At 9 o'clock, the board assembled. 9 directors, financial reports, growth projections, expansion plans. Ryan stood confidently before the presentation screen. Our quarterly revenue exceeded expectations. He spoke smoothly. Years of experience had made public speaking second nature. The board listened attentively. Jasmine sat quietly beside him, occasionally making notes. Everything seemed routine, until board member Eleanor Pierce raised her hand. "What contingency plan do we have if the Tennessee facility reaches maximum capacity before the new distribution center opens?" Ryan answered first. "We're monitoring the situation." Eleanor nodded politely. "Monitoring is important." Then she looked toward Jasmine. "Ms. Mitchell?" Ryan glanced sideways. He hadn't expected the question. Jasmine remained calm. "I've prepared an alternative distribution model." She connected her laptop. Within seconds, a detailed logistics map appeared. Warehouse loads shifted. Transportation costs adjusted. Delivery times improved. One director leaned forward. "When was this prepared?" "Late last week." Ryan looked surprised. "You didn't mention you'd finalized it." She answered gently. "I was still verifying the numbers." The room grew quiet. Board members exchanged glances. Several began taking notes. One whispered, "Impressive." Ryan felt something unfamiliar. Not jealousy. Something closer to discomfort. He wasn't upset that Jasmine had excellent work. He simply hadn't realized how much independent planning she was doing. After the meeting ended, directors lingered. Ryan stepped into the hallway to answer a phone call. Inside the conference room, several board members remained with Jasmine. "Excellent preparation," Eleanor said. "Thank you." "We'll need to discuss implementation." "Of course." Outside, Ryan finished his call and watched through the glass wall. People were listening carefully to Jasmine. Not casually, not politely, seriously. He smiled to himself. She deserved recognition. He honestly believed that. Yet a small voice inside him whispered something he quickly ignored. When had they started looking to her before looking to him? That afternoon, the executive team gathered for lunch. Conversation shifted between business and weekend plans. Chief Financial Officer David Lang laughed. "I swear, Jasmine saved my department again this morning." Ryan smiled. "She's good at that." David chuckled. "Good is an understatement." Several executives nodded. Ryan laughed along. But something about their expressions lingered with him. They weren't complimenting his wife, simply because she was capable. They trusted her, deeply, almost instinctively. Around 4 o'clock, Jasmine stopped by Ryan's office. He looked up from his emails. "Hey, you have a minute?" "Sure." She closed the door behind her. "I've been thinking about Tennessee." Ryan leaned back. "So have I. I really think we should begin redistributing inventory before Friday." He rubbed his temples. "The board wants stability. They also want results. If we wait until next week..." She paused. "Ryan," he looked at her. "If we wait, we're taking a bigger risk." He considered her words, then sighed. "I'll think about it." She gave a small nod. "Okay." No frustration, no raised voice. She simply left. Ryan returned to his emails. Without realizing it, he had once again postponed the one conversation that mattered most. That evening they drove home together. Traffic crawled through downtown Charlotte. The silence between them wasn't hostile, just familiar. Ryan finally spoke. "You did a great job today." "Thank you." The board seemed impressed. They asked good questions. He smiled. "You've always been good under pressure." She looked out the passenger window. "I've had a lot of practice." Ryan assumed she meant work. He never realized she meant something much deeper. As night settled over the city, the lights inside Mitchell Freight Solutions slowly turned off one floor at a time. Most employees headed home. But on the top floor, 2 board members remained in a conference room overlooking the skyline. A folder rested on the polished table. Inside it were confidential performance evaluations. One page carried Ryan Mitchell's name. Another carried Jasmine Mitchell's. Neither of them knew that conversations had quietly begun. Conversations that could change not only the future of the company, but also the foundation of their marriage. Sometimes life's biggest turning points don't arrive with loud announcements. Sometimes they begin behind closed doors, while the people most affected continue living as though tomorrow will look exactly like yesterday. Thursday began like any other workday. But by Friday morning, Mitchell Freight Solutions was already feeling the strain Jasmine had tried to prevent. Heavy rain across parts of Tennessee had slowed freight traffic overnight. A mechanical breakdown at one distribution hub forced several outbound shipments to wait longer than expected. What might have remained a manageable inconvenience quickly spread across multiple routes, leaving dispatchers scrambling to rearrange deliveries. By 7:30, the operations floor buzzed with controlled urgency. Computer screens flashed updated schedules every few seconds. Phones rang almost continuously. Drivers checked revised routes, while customer service representatives worked to reassure clients that their shipments were still moving. Jasmine walked onto the operations floor carrying a notebook instead of a laptop. She preferred writing things down when problems became complicated. It forced her to slow her thinking before making decisions. Miguel Alvarez met her halfway across the room. "The Louisville reroute would have prevented most of this." She nodded once. "I know." There wasn't bitterness in her voice, only quiet acceptance. "We don't have time to revisit yesterday," she said. "Let's solve today's problem." That was one of the reasons employees trusted her. She rarely wasted energy proving she had been right. She focused on what needed to happen next. Ryan arrived 20 minutes later, after finishing a breakfast meeting with 2 potential investors. The atmosphere felt different the moment he stepped off the elevator. No one appeared panicked, but everyone moved with unusual purpose. David Lang approached him. "We've got delays across 3 regional hubs." Ryan frowned. "How bad?" "We're still calculating." Ryan headed directly toward the executive conference room. "Let's pull everyone together." Within minutes, department heads gathered around the long conference table. Large digital maps displayed shipment locations across the southeast. Several routes glowed red. Others flashed yellow. Ryan stood at the front of the room. "Let's hear our options." Managers began presenting reports one after another. Warehouse capacity, fuel availability, driver scheduling, customer complaints. Each department focused naturally on its own responsibilities. The discussion slowly became scattered. Different teams suggested different priorities. Some wanted to protect costs. Others wanted to protect delivery times. Several proposals solved one problem while creating another. Ryan listened carefully. He was trying to weigh every recommendation. Before he could respond, Jasmine quietly stood. She didn't interrupt anyone. She waited until the room became still. "May I?" Ryan nodded. She walked toward the display screen. Instead of beginning with her own recommendation, she picked up a marker and drew 3 circles on the digital board. "Our biggest mistake right now," she said calmly, "is treating these as separate problems." Everyone looked up. "The warehouse delays." She tapped the first circle. "The transportation bottlenecks." She tapped the second. "And the customer complaints." There, she tapped the third. They're all connected. She linked the circles with 3 simple lines. If we only solve one, the other 2 continue growing. The room fell silent. Miguel leaned back in his chair. Keep going. Jasmine turned toward the group. We need one coordinated response. For the next 20 minutes, she assigned responsibilities, not as orders, but as questions. Can transportation support temporary overnight routes? Can customer service proactively contact priority accounts before they call us? Can warehouse supervisors stagger loading schedules instead of increasing overtime? One by one, department heads answered. Ideas improved. Concerns were addressed. The discussion became collaborative instead of defensive. Ryan watched quietly. He realized something he had never consciously noticed before. People didn't simply obey Jasmine. They thought more clearly around her. By lunchtime, the first improvements were already visible. Drivers received updated schedules. Delayed freight began moving again. Customer complaints slowed. Warehouse congestion eased. The crisis wasn't over, but it had stopped getting worse. David Lang reviewed the latest numbers and smiled. We just avoided a very expensive weekend. Miguel nodded. And probably saved several major client accounts. Ryan looked toward Jasmine. She wasn't celebrating. She was helping a dispatcher explain revised schedules to 2 new employees. No speeches, no congratulations. She simply returned to work. Late that afternoon, Ryan and Jasmine finally found a few quiet minutes in his office. He closed the door behind them. You handled today well. She smiled faintly. We all did. You kept everyone focused. They already knew what needed to happen. I don't think they did. She looked at him for a moment. People usually know more than we think. Ryan leaned against his desk. I guess I underestimated how complicated things had become. She hesitated. You underestimated how quickly they were becoming complicated. He nodded slowly. That's fair. It was a small admission. For Jasmine, it mattered. Not because she wanted to be right, because she wanted to be heard before problems became emergencies. That evening, the executive parking garage emptied slowly. Employees climbed into their cars, exhausted, but relieved. Inside their SUV, neither Ryan nor Jasmine spoke for several blocks. Finally, Ryan broke the silence. You've been quiet. She smiled gently. I've been talking all day. He laughed. Fair enough. After another moment he asked, Are you upset with me? She looked out the window as traffic rolled past. No. Then what is it? She searched for the right words. I'm tired. From today? She shook her head. Not just today. Ryan frowned slightly. You've been working too hard. She almost answered. Almost. Instead, she simply said, We both have. He accepted the answer without realizing it wasn't the complete truth. Jasmine wasn't only tired from work. She was tired of repeating herself. Tired of waiting for her ideas to matter before a crisis instead of after one. Tired of wondering whether being patient had slowly become being invisible. She didn't blame Ryan entirely. She knew he wasn't intentionally dismissive. That was what made it so difficult. Neglect, wrapped in kindness, can take years to recognize. Saturday morning offered no chance to slow down. The executive team gathered again for a weekend review. To everyone's surprise, 2 members of the board attended as observers. Eleanor Pierce arrived carrying only a notebook. Beside her sat board chairman Harold Whitmore. Neither interrupted the meeting. They simply watched. They watched who answered difficult questions, who remained calm, who listened before speaking, who accepted responsibility, who inspired confidence when uncertainty filled the room. Ryan remained composed. He facilitated discussion well. He encouraged participation. Years of leadership experience showed, but Eleanor noticed something else. Whenever operations became highly technical, eyes gradually shifted toward Jasmine. Not because Ryan lacked intelligence, because Jasmine consistently connected details others overlooked. Harold quietly wrote something inside his notebook. No one noticed. After the meeting ended, Eleanor approached Harold near the elevator. What do you think? He waited until the doors closed. I think we're seeing 2 different kinds of leadership. Eleanor nodded. One leads from position, and the other? From trust. Neither spoke again until they reached the lobby. Later that afternoon, Ryan visited his father, Thomas Mitchell, at his home outside Charlotte. Thomas had officially retired 5 years earlier, but still owned a significant share of the company. They sat on the back porch, overlooking a quiet lake. Busy week? Thomas asked. Ryan smiled. You could say that. His father chuckled. I've been hearing good things. About the company? About Jasmine? Ryan looked surprised. Dad? People talk. Ryan leaned back. She's done excellent work. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. You know what your grandfather taught me? Ryan smiled. Probably 100 things. His father laughed. He used to say, the smartest leader isn't the one with all the answers. Ryan waited. It's the one who knows whose answers deserve attention. The words lingered longer than Ryan expected. That same evening, Jasmine sat alone on the back patio with a cup of tea. The sun disappeared behind the trees. She wasn't thinking about becoming more successful. She wasn't dreaming about promotions. She simply wondered when speaking up had started feeling so exhausting. Inside the house, Ryan answered emails from the study. Neither realized they were carrying the same emotion. Fatigue, not from work alone. From habits, neither had fully examined. One habit was speaking before listening. The other was remaining silent long after something should have been said. Both patterns had quietly followed them for years. Both would soon be challenged in ways neither could imagine. On Monday morning, before most employees arrived, the board of directors gathered in a private conference room. The agenda listed routine financial reviews, expansion strategy, executive evaluations. Nothing unusual appeared on paper. Yet, after the formal business concluded, Chairman Harold Whitmore closed the folder in front of him. I believe, he said quietly, it's time we discuss the future leadership of Mitchell Freight Solutions. The room grew still. Outside the conference room, employees began another ordinary workday. Inside, a conversation began that would alter two careers and force one marriage to confront truths that had been quietly waiting for years. Ryan still believes he has everything under control. Jasmine has stopped expecting to be heard before a crisis proves her right. But behind closed boardroom doors, a conversation has already begun, one that could change not only who leads Mitchell Freight Solutions, but also the future of their marriage. Will Ryan recognize what he's been overlooking before it's too late? Or will losing his position be the only thing that finally opens his eyes to the value of the woman who has quietly stood beside him all these years? If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like, subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss Chapter 2. And tell me in the comments, do you think Ryan truly loves Jasmine but has taken her for granted? Or has he confused love with simply being comfortable? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Monday mornings usually carried a predictable rhythm at Mitchell Freight Solutions. Employees arrived with coffee cups in hand, exchanged greetings in the lobby, and settled into the routines that kept thousands of shipments moving across the southeast. Forklifts hummed inside regional warehouses. Dispatchers checked overnight reports. Customer service representatives logged into their systems before the phones began ringing in earnest. To everyone else, it was another ordinary start to the week. No one knew that, 2 floors above them, the company's board of directors was preparing to make the most significant leadership decision in its 34-year history. Ryan Mitchell stepped out of the elevator, carrying a leather portfolio and his usual quiet confidence. He had spent the weekend thinking about the logistics crisis and the conversations with his father. More than once, Thomas Mitchell's words had replayed in his mind. The smartest leader isn't the one with all the answers. It's the one who knows whose answers deserve attention. Ryan had brushed the thought aside each time. He respected his father, but he also believed every generation faced different challenges. Running a modern logistics company required speed, confidence, and decisive leadership. There wasn't always time for endless discussion. As he crossed the executive floor, several employees greeted him. Good morning, Mr. Mitchell. Morning, sir. He smiled warmly, asking one employee about her son's baseball tournament before continuing toward his office. Ryan genuinely cared about people. That had never been the problem. Across the hall, Jasmine Mitchell was already reviewing reports with Miguel Alvarez. The rerouting worked better than expected, Miguel said, handing her a summary sheet. She scanned the numbers. Weekend delivery performance had recovered faster than anticipated. Customer complaints had dropped nearly 40% since Friday. Fuel costs had risen slightly because of the temporary reroutes, but overall losses remained far below the projections from earlier in the week. This is encouraging, Jasmine said. Miguel nodded. We should probably make some of these routing changes permanent. I'd rather study another month of data first. Miguel smiled. That's why people trust your decisions. She looked up. Why? Because you don't confuse confidence with certainty. Jasmine gave a modest shrug. I've made enough mistakes to know the difference. It wasn't false humility. She genuinely believed every successful decision depended on remaining willing to learn. At 9 o'clock, executive assistants began delivering calendar updates. Ryan noticed an unfamiliar invitation. Executive session, board of directors, attendance required, Ryan Mitchell and Jasmine Mitchell. He frowned. Board executive sessions were uncommon. They usually involved acquisitions, legal matters, or long-term strategic planning. Jasmine glanced at her own calendar. You got the invitation too? He nodded. Probably expansion planning. Maybe. Neither gave it much thought. Meanwhile, Inside the boardroom, Chairman Harold Whitmore addressed the directors. I appreciate everyone making time for this discussion. Financial reports lay neatly arranged around the table. Leadership evaluations rested beneath them. Harold folded his hands. Our responsibility is not only protecting today's company. He paused. It's preparing the company for the next decade. Several directors nodded. Eleanor Pierce opened a folder. Over the past 18 months, we've evaluated executive performance across every division. Charts appeared on the screen. Revenue growth, employee retention, operational efficiency, client satisfaction, leadership assessments. None of the information surprised the board. They had reviewed most of it before, but seeing everything presented together painted a clearer picture. Harold spoke carefully. This discussion is not about assigning blame. It's about identifying where our strongest leadership exists. Back downstairs, Ryan stopped by the operations department. Several employees were discussing revised scheduling software. He watched Jasmine answering questions from two supervisors. She wasn't giving orders. She was asking them what they were seeing on the ground. One supervisor admitted he wasn't sure whether a proposed schedule would work. Instead of correcting him, Jasmine said, "Let's test it for 2 weeks." The supervisor visibly relaxed. Ryan found himself smiling. She had a gift for making people feel comfortable admitting uncertainty. He admired that. He simply hadn't considered how powerful that quality could be in a CEO. Around noon, Ryan and Jasmine met for lunch in the company cafeteria. It was something they still tried to do whenever their schedules allowed. The conversation stayed comfortably ordinary. Their niece's upcoming birthday, a neighbor renovating his backyard, Ryan's mother insisting everyone come over for Sunday dinner. For a little while, work disappeared. Jasmine stirred her soup thoughtfully. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When you imagine where the company will be in 10 years?" Ryan leaned back. "What do you see?" He smiled. "Expansion." She waited. "New markets?" She nodded. "What else?" He considered the question. "A stronger national presence." She smiled softly. "I was wondering about the people." He looked puzzled. "The people?" "The employees. The managers. The drivers. The warehouse teams. What do you hope their experience feels like?" Ryan paused longer this time. He had spent years planning for growth, profit margins, technology, expansion. He realized he had rarely imagined what daily life inside the company should feel like. "I haven't thought about it that way." She wasn't criticizing him. "I think about it a lot." "What do you hope?" She looked around the cafeteria. "I hope people feel respected." He nodded slowly. "So do I." "I know," she smiled. "I just think respect sometimes grows from different things than success." Before Ryan could ask what she meant, both of their phones vibrated. A reminder. Executive session. 1:30 p.m. The boardroom felt unusually formal that afternoon. Every director was present. Ryan and Jasmine entered together. Harold greeted them politely. "Thank you for joining us." Ryan sat confidently. Jasmine placed a notebook in front of her. Neither expected what followed. Harold began with appreciation. "First, I want to thank both of you for your commitment to this company." He spoke about recent achievements, growth, innovation, employee dedication. Then his tone became more deliberate. "As directors, we also have a responsibility to evaluate leadership effectiveness." Ryan listened calmly. Annual evaluations were routine. Harold continued. "Over the past year, we've observed a significant shift in how executive leadership functions across the organization." Ryan noticed several board members exchanging thoughtful glances. Eleanor opened another folder. "We've interviewed department heads, regional managers, long-term clients, supervisors." She looked toward Ryan. "We also conducted confidential employee leadership surveys." Ryan's heartbeat slowed slightly. This was more extensive than usual. Harold continued. "The results consistently highlighted one conclusion." The room became silent. "Mitchell Freight Solutions possesses exceptional leadership." Ryan felt a brief sense of relief. Then Harold finished the sentence. "And much of that leadership is currently being exercised by Jasmine Mitchell." Ryan looked toward his wife. She appeared just as surprised as he was. Harold spoke gently. "This isn't an easy conversation. No one questions your dedication, Ryan. You've helped this company grow tremendously." Eleanor added, "But growth has also exposed changing leadership needs." Charts appeared on the screen. Employee trust ratings, cross-department collaboration, operational performance, crisis management evaluations, in nearly every category. Jasmine scored higher, not slightly, consistently. Ryan studied the numbers. He wasn't angry. He simply hadn't expected them. Jasmine finally spoke. "I'm honored by the confidence." She hesitated. But Ryan has led this company for years. Harold nodded. And no one is dismissing that contribution. He folded his hands. However, every eye in the room focused on him. The board has reached a unanimous decision regarding the company's future leadership. Ryan felt the air grow heavier. For the first time in years, he wasn't sure what was about to happen, and somewhere, deep inside him, a quiet realization began to form. Whatever came next, nothing about this day would be ordinary again. The silence that followed seemed to stretch far longer than it actually did. Ryan glanced around the room. No one looked uncomfortable. No one appeared eager for conflict. If anything, the directors looked thoughtful, almost reluctant, as though they understood the weight of what they were about to say. Harold Whitmore slowly folded his reading glasses and placed them on the table. This decision wasn't made after one difficult week, he said calmly. It came after nearly 2 years of observation, evaluation, and discussion. Ryan's expression remained composed, but he could feel the muscles in his jaw tightening. 2 years. They had been evaluating leadership for 2 years. Without his knowledge, Eleanor Pierce slid a folder across the polished conference table. Inside were summaries from regional managers, department heads, client satisfaction reports, and leadership assessments gathered over multiple quarters. We wanted a complete picture, she explained, not isolated successes or failures. Ryan opened the folder. The first few pages praised his strengths: vision, confidence, public representation, relationship building with investors. The comments were genuine. He had worked hard to earn that reputation. Then he reached another section: areas of concern. Executive decisions often become stronger after operational review, from COO Jasmine Mitchell. Department leaders report feeling more comfortable discussing difficult issues with Jasmine because they believe she listens before reaching conclusions. During periods of crisis, multiple divisions naturally seek Jasmine's guidance before requesting executive approval. Ryan turned another page, then another. The pattern remained consistent. No criticism was cruel. No observation was personal. Together, however, they painted a picture he had never fully seen. Harold broke the silence. Leadership isn't only about making decisions. It's also about creating an environment where other people consistently make better decisions. Ryan slowly closed the folder. He wasn't embarrassed. Not yet. Mostly, he felt confused. I wish someone had talked to me sooner. Harold nodded. I understand. So, why didn't you? Because we believed these patterns would become clearer with time. Ryan leaned back in his chair. And they did. They did. Across the table, Jasmine remained unusually still. She hadn't touched the folder placed in front of her. She wasn't interested in comparing scores. That wasn't why she had come to work every day. Finally, she spoke. I don't want Ryan to think I've been competing against him. Harold smiled gently. We've never believed you were. She looked at Ryan. I haven't. He met her eyes. I know. And he meant it. Never once had Jasmine tried to undermine him. She had never corrected him publicly. Never lobbied the board behind his back. Never treated his position as something she deserved instead. If anything, she had spent years protecting his credibility. That realization settled heavily inside him. Harold continued. The board unanimously voted this morning to appoint a new chief executive officer. No one moved. Ryan's breathing slowed. We believe Mitchell Freight Solutions has reached a point where operational leadership and organizational trust are its greatest competitive advantages. He turned toward Jasmine. Effective immediately, Jasmine Mitchell will serve as chief executive officer. The words landed quietly. There was no dramatic music, no applause, only silence. Jasmine blinked once. She stopped herself. For perhaps the first time in her professional life, she genuinely didn't know what to say. Harold continued. Ryan Mitchell will remain with the company during a structured leadership transition. We value your experience, your relationships, and everything you've contributed. Ryan heard the words. He simply couldn't process them all at once. CEO, Jasmine, not him. He had imagined many possibilities for the company's future. This had never been one of them. After several long seconds, he stood. Every director instinctively watched him. Ryan took a slow breath before extending his hand toward Jasmine. Congratulations. His voice was steady, sincere. Jasmine looked at him, searching his face. She took his hand. Thank you. Neither smiled. Neither cried. The moment carried too many emotions for either reaction. Harold quietly nodded. Thank you, Ryan. We know this isn't easy. Ryan answered honestly. No, it isn't. He gathered his portfolio, excused himself politely, and walked toward the door. No one tried to stop him. No one thought he was leaving out of anger. Sometimes people simply need space to absorb a life-changing moment. The hallway outside felt strangely quiet. Employees passed by carrying laptops and coffee cups, completely unaware that the company's leadership had just changed forever. Ryan walked to the large windows overlooking Charlotte. Traffic flowed steadily below. Construction cranes stretched across the skyline. Everything outside continued exactly as it had an hour earlier. Inside him, however, nothing felt the same. He replayed dozens of conversations with Jasmine. The mornings she had suggested solutions he promised to revisit later. The meetings where she had spoken after he already believed the discussion was finished. The evenings when she had quietly said, "I think we should act now." He had never ignored her because he believed she lacked intelligence. He ignored urgency because he believed there would always be another opportunity to listen. For the first time, he wondered how many opportunities had quietly passed him by. Back inside the boardroom, Jasmine remained seated. Eleanor smiled warmly. "You seem surprised." "I am. You shouldn't be." Jasmine looked down at the folder still resting in front of her. "I've never wanted Ryan's position." "We know." "I wanted us to succeed." Harold nodded. "And that's one of the reasons you're sitting in this chair now." She exhaled slowly. "I don't know how to tell him that this doesn't feel like winning." Harold's expression softened. "Because it isn't." Leadership, he explained, was rarely about defeating another person. It was about accepting greater responsibility. And responsibility, he added, can be heavier than any title. Jasmine understood exactly what he meant. She wasn't walking into an office someone else had failed to protect. She was stepping into a role that would test every lesson she had learned about patience, humility, and courage. Outside the conference room, employees continued their work, unaware that an announcement would soon ripple through every department. Some would celebrate, some would be shocked, some would worry about what the future might bring. But the person who worried most in that moment wasn't Ryan. It was Jasmine, because she knew the hardest part of becoming CEO wouldn't be leading the company. It would be finding a way to lead it without losing the man she still loved. She wasn't afraid of the promotion. She was afraid of what it might cost them if they allowed pride, silence, or misunderstanding to speak louder than the years they had spent building a life together. And somewhere down the hall, standing alone beside a window overlooking the city, Ryan asked himself a question he had never seriously considered before. If the entire company had learned to trust Jasmine before I did, what else have I failed to see? Ryan remained by the window for several minutes before returning to his office. He expected to feel angry. Instead, he felt unsettled. His entire career had been built on solving problems quickly, yet this was one problem he couldn't fix with a meeting, a presentation, or another strategic plan. His assistant, Claire, looked up as he walked past her desk. "Everything okay?" Ryan forced a small smile. "I'm just thinking." She nodded politely. "I'll hold your calls for a while." "Thank you." Inside his office, he closed the door without locking it. The room looked exactly as it had that morning. The framed awards, the photographs from company anniversaries, a picture of him and Jasmine cutting the ribbon at the opening of their Nashville distribution center. He picked up the photograph. Everyone had been smiling. He remembered that day clearly. Reporters had congratulated him on another successful expansion. Someone had asked how the company managed to stay ahead of its competitors. Without hesitation, Ryan had answered, "We have an incredible team." At the time, he believed that statement completely. What he hadn't said, because he hadn't fully realized it himself, was that many of the company's strongest ideas had first taken shape during late-night conversations with Jasmine at their kitchen table. Ideas he later presented to the board. Ideas he sincerely believed had become their decisions. Only now was he beginning to recognize that many of those conversations had started with her observations, not his. The realization didn't accuse him. It simply humbled him. Across the executive floor, Jasmine stood alone inside what would soon become her office. The room was empty, except for a large conference table and windows overlooking downtown Charlotte. She had been inside countless times before. Today, it felt unfamiliar. She imagined her name on the door. The thought didn't fill her with excitement. It filled her with responsibility. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in." Miguel stepped inside. "I just heard." She smiled faintly. "So did I." He laughed softly. "I don't know whether to congratulate you or ask if you're okay." "I'm still deciding that myself." Miguel folded his arms. "You've earned this." She looked at him. "I wasn't trying to." "I know. That may be why you did." She appreciated the kindness, but the compliment settled awkwardly in her chest. She had never viewed leadership as a prize. To her, leadership meant carrying more people's worries than your own. Today, those worries included her husband. News traveled through the company faster than anyone expected. No official announcement had been made yet. Even so, whispers spread from one department to another. "Have you heard? They're changing leadership." "Is it true?" I heard Jasmine's taking over. Warehouse supervisors exchanged curious glances. Drivers texted one another during breaks. Office employees refreshed internal messaging channels, hoping for confirmation. Some were surprised. Others quietly admitted they had expected something like this for months. Not because Ryan had failed, but because Jasmine had gradually become the person everyone instinctively trusted during difficult moments. Around 3 o'clock, Harold called both Ryan and Jasmine back into the boardroom. This time, the atmosphere felt lighter. The difficult decision had already been shared. Now, practical questions remained. The official announcement will go out tomorrow morning, Harold explained. We'd like both of you present. Ryan nodded. I'll be there. Harold looked relieved. Thank you. He knew many executives would have reacted differently. Some would have resigned immediately. Others might have challenged the board's decision. Ryan wasn't pretending to be unaffected. He was choosing professionalism while his emotions caught up. Harold respected that. We'd also like your input on the transition. Ryan looked toward Jasmine before answering. If the goal is helping the company succeed. He paused. Then I'll help however I can. Jasmine met his eyes. There was gratitude there, and sadness, because she understood what that promise had cost him. The drive home felt longer than usual. Rain tapped softly against the windshield. The radio remained off. Traffic moved slowly through evening congestion. For nearly 20 minutes, neither of them spoke. Finally, Ryan broke the silence. So? Jasmine turned toward him. So? He let out a quiet breath. I don't know what I'm supposed to say. You don't have to say anything yet. I keep wondering if I missed something. She looked back out the window. You missed some things. He nodded. I figured. Another silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, just careful. Ryan tightened his hands around the steering wheel. Did you know? She answered immediately. No. You never spoke to the board? Not about this. You never asked for the position? No. He believed her without hesitation. That wasn't the question troubling him. I know you didn't. She glanced at him. Then what are you wondering? Ryan searched for words that felt honest. I'm wondering how everyone else saw something I didn't. Jasmine didn't answer immediately. She had asked herself the opposite question for years. Why couldn't the person closest to me see what everyone else already recognized? But she also knew this wasn't the moment to settle old disappointments. Instead, she said quietly, sometimes we're closest to the things we understand the least. Ryan thought about that all the way home. That evening, neither of them had much appetite. Dinner sat untouched for several minutes. Finally, Jasmine stood. I'm making tea. Ryan nodded. I'll help. You don't have to. I know. He followed her into the kitchen anyway. For years, this room had been where they solved countless problems together. Choosing paint colors, planning vacations, discussing family holidays, working through difficult business decisions. Tonight felt different. The silence wasn't filled with resentment. It was filled with uncertainty. Ryan reached for 2 mugs. Without thinking, he placed Jasmine's favorite blue mug beside the kettle. She noticed. A small habit. One he had never forgotten. She smiled softly. Thanks. He returned the smile. Neither of them said it aloud, but both understood something important in that moment. Love had never been absent from their marriage. Respect had simply failed to grow at the same pace. And love alone had not been enough. Later that night, Ryan sat on the back porch while the neighborhood grew quiet. His phone buzzed. It was his father. Can you talk? Yeah. Thomas listened patiently as Ryan explained everything. When he finished, several seconds passed before his father spoke. I'm sorry. Ryan stared into the darkness. I keep thinking I should have seen this coming. Maybe. I thought I was doing a good job. You were, Ryan frowned. Then why does this feel like failure? Thomas answered carefully. Because you're measuring yourself by the title you lost instead of the man you're becoming. Ryan remained silent. His father continued. Son, there's something I never told you. What? When I stepped down as CEO, Ryan listened closely. I recommended Jasmine as my successor. Ryan's eyes widened. You did? I did. What changed? The board believed you needed the opportunity first. Ryan struggled to process the admission. You thought she was ready. 5 years ago? Thomas smiled sadly. I thought both of you were talented. But I also believed she understood something leadership eventually requires. Ryan swallowed. What? That being heard begins with listening. The conversation ended a few minutes later, but Ryan remained outside long after the call. For years he had assumed leadership naturally belonged to him because he had inherited the position. Now he understood something his father had quietly recognized long ago. Titles can be inherited. Trust cannot. Trust is earned one conversation, one decision, and one act of humility at a time. And for the first time in many years, Ryan wondered whether losing the highest position in the company might become the beginning of learning how to become a better leader, and perhaps an even better husband. The following morning, Mitchell Freight Solutions felt unusually quiet. Not because fewer people had come to work. Quite the opposite. Employees had arrived earlier than normal, each carrying the same unanswered question. What happens now? At exactly 8:30 a.m., an email from the board of directors appeared in every employee's inbox. The subject line read, "Leadership Transition Announcement." People stopped what they were doing. Warehouse supervisors checked the email from company tablets. Drivers read it before beginning their morning routes. Administrative assistants paused in the middle of scheduling meetings. The announcement thanked Ryan Mitchell for his years of leadership, recognizing the company's growth under his direction and his commitment to employees and clients. It then introduced Jasmine Mitchell as the new Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. The final paragraph emphasized continuity. The company's values would remain the same. Its commitment to employees would remain unchanged. Ryan would continue serving during the transition to ensure stability. Within minutes, conversations began across every department. "I didn't expect this. I honestly thought Jasmine was already running most things. This actually makes sense. I just hope Ryan's okay." Most employees weren't celebrating Ryan's loss, nor were they treating Jasmine's promotion as gossip. Many genuinely respected both of them. What they hoped for most was that the company, and the marriage everyone admired, would survive the transition. Jasmine stood outside the executive conference room before the company-wide meeting. She adjusted the sleeve of her navy blazer and took a slow breath. Public speaking had never frightened her. Speaking after replacing her husband as CEO was something entirely different. Harold stepped beside her. "Nervous?" She smiled. "A little." "That's healthy." She looked at him. "You don't think confidence is better?" Harold shook his head. "Confidence helps you speak. Nervousness reminds you that your words matter." She quietly reflected on that. Inside the conference room, more than 100 managers had gathered. Others joined through live video from regional offices. The atmosphere was respectful but uncertain. Ryan entered first. Several employees instinctively stood. He smiled politely. "Please, have a seat." A moment later, Jasmine entered beside him. Neither walked ahead of the other. Neither tried to command the room. Harold stepped to the podium. "Good morning, everyone." He thanked employees for their dedication before formally announcing the leadership transition. When he finished, he invited Ryan to speak first. The room became completely still. Ryan walked to the microphone. For several seconds, he simply looked across the audience. Many faces were familiar. Some employees had worked with him for more than a decade. He took a slow breath. "I won't pretend this week has been easy." A few people nodded. But leadership isn't about pretending difficult moments don't exist. He paused. It's about deciding how we respond to them. His voice remained calm. "I've been honored to lead this company. I've made decisions I'm proud of. And I've made decisions I wish I'd handled differently." The honesty surprised several people. Ryan continued. "One thing has become very clear to me over the past few days." He turned toward Jasmine. "This company is in capable hands." Jasmine lowered her eyes briefly. "I've had the privilege of working beside someone whose commitment to this organization has strengthened every department, every warehouse, and every customer relationship." He smiled gently. "I hope you'll support her with the same dedication you've always shown me." For a moment, the room remained silent. Then, applause slowly began. Not loud, not dramatic, just sincere. Jasmine felt emotion rise unexpectedly in her chest. She hadn't expected Ryan to defend her publicly. She certainly hadn't expected him to do it with such grace. When the applause faded, Harold invited Jasmine to the podium. She looked across the room. Instead of beginning with prepared remarks, she closed the folder she had brought. "I spent most of last night rewriting my speech." Soft laughter eased the tension. Every version sounded like someone trying to prove she deserved to be here. She shook her head. "So, I'm going to tell you something simpler." The room grew quiet again. "I don't believe leadership is about having the best ideas. It's about helping the best ideas reach the people who need them." She looked around the room. "Some of the smartest people in this company don't work on the executive floor." Several warehouse managers smiled. The driver who spent 15 years on the same route. The mechanic who notices a problem before anyone else. The customer service representative who calms frustrated clients. The warehouse supervisor who understands exactly why one loading schedule works better than another. She paused. "My job isn't to know more than all of you. My job is to make sure your knowledge isn't ignored." Employees exchanged thoughtful glances. This wasn't the kind of speech they expected from a new CEO. Jasmine continued, "If we're going to grow, everyone deserves to feel heard. That includes people who disagree with me." The applause that followed was stronger this time. Not because she promised perfection, because she promised respect. After the meeting ended, employees gathered in small groups throughout the building. Several approached Ryan. "That was a classy speech. We appreciate everything you've done." He thanked each person sincerely. Across the lobby, Jasmine found herself surrounded by department heads congratulating her. Even amid the conversations, she noticed Ryan standing alone near the windows for a moment. She excused herself politely. Walking over, she stood beside him. Neither spoke immediately. Finally she asked, "How are you doing?" Ryan laughed softly. "I've answered that question about 20 times already." "And?" "I've given 20 different answers." She smiled. "Any of them true?" He thought for a second. "I'm disappointed." She nodded. "I'd be surprised if you weren't." "I'm also proud of you." She looked at him carefully. "You can be both." He smiled faintly. "I'm learning that." That afternoon, Jasmine officially moved into the CEO's office. The administrative team offered to redecorate immediately. She declined. "Let's leave it the way it is for now." One assistant looked surprised. "You don't want to make it your own?" Jasmine ran her hand across the polished conference table. "I'll make it my own through the way I lead." Furniture wasn't what defined leadership. Habits did. Ryan spent the afternoon meeting with department directors, helping transfer projects and responsibilities. More than once, he caught himself beginning a sentence with, "Ask me," before stopping and saying, "No, ask Jasmine." Each correction stung a little. Not because he doubted her, because every correction reminded him that his role had changed. Late in the afternoon, David Lang knocked on Ryan's office door. "You've got a minute?" "Sure." David stepped inside. "I've been wanting to tell you something." Ryan gestured toward the chair. David remained standing. "When I first joined this company..." Ryan listened. "I was terrified of presenting financial reports." Ryan laughed. "I remember." "You probably don't remember why." Ryan frowned. "No. Because Jasmine stayed after every board meeting for almost 3 months helping me prepare." Ryan looked surprised. "She never mentioned that." David smiled. "She asked me not to." He hesitated. "I guess what I'm trying to say is, she's been leading people quietly for a very long time." Ryan looked down at his desk. "I know." "No." David shook his head gently. "I don't think you did." The words weren't meant to wound him. They simply carried the truth. After David left, Ryan remained seated for several minutes. He wasn't thinking about losing authority anymore. He was thinking about all the moments of quiet leadership he had walked past without truly seeing. Not because he believed Jasmine wasn't capable, but because he had unconsciously assumed support and leadership couldn't exist in the same person. For the first time, he began questioning assumptions he had never realized he carried. And he knew changing those assumptions would take far more than a single apology. It would require becoming the kind of listener he had always believed he already was. The first week after the transition settled into an unexpected rhythm. There were no dramatic confrontations, no whispered office conspiracies, no power struggles. Instead, life continued much as it always had. Shipments left warehouses before sunrise. Drivers crossed state lines. Managers attended planning meetings. Customers called with questions. The business kept moving. Yet beneath those familiar routines, something subtle had changed. People began watching not just what Jasmine decided, but how she led. Her first executive meeting as CEO was scheduled for Monday morning. The conference room filled several minutes early. Department heads arranged their laptops, while assistants distributed updated reports. Ryan arrived quietly and took his new seat farther down the table. For the first time in nearly 8 years, he wasn't sitting at the head. The empty feeling surprised him more than he expected. It wasn't about status, it was habit. He had unconsciously associated that chair with responsibility. Now someone else carried it. Jasmine entered exactly at 9. She smiled at everyone before taking her seat. "Good morning." The room answered almost in unison. "Good morning." Instead of opening with financial projections, she asked a different question. "Before we discuss this week's priorities." She looked around the room. "What problem is keeping each of you awake lately?" Several executives exchanged puzzled glances. That wasn't on the agenda. No one spoke immediately. Finally, Miguel raised his hand. "Our Atlanta warehouse is hiring faster than we're training." Jasmine nodded and wrote it down. "Thank you." She turned toward another manager. "Lena? Our customer response times are improving, but newer employees still struggle with difficult conversations. She wrote that down too. David spoke next. We're growing faster than our budgeting process. One by one, everyone contributed. By the time the conversation ended, the whiteboard contained nearly 30 different concerns. Ryan studied the list. Normally, a meeting like this would have focused on quarterly goals first. Jasmine had started somewhere else. She wanted to understand what obstacles people were carrying before asking them to accomplish more. Finally, she stood. I appreciate everyone's honesty. She pointed toward the board. These aren't interruptions to our work. They are our work. No one argued. After the meeting, Ryan caught up with Miguel in the hallway. What did you think? Miguel smiled. I've never seen everyone talk that much in an executive meeting. Ryan laughed softly. Neither have I. Miguel hesitated. You know? Ryan waited. I think people feel safer admitting problems now. Ryan frowned slightly. Were they afraid before? Miguel chose his words carefully. Not afraid. He searched for a better description. They just wanted to bring you solutions instead of concerns. Ryan understood immediately. People believed he valued confidence, so they often hid uncertainty until they had already worked through it. Jasmine had somehow created the opposite effect. People trusted her enough to admit what they didn't know. That difference stayed with Ryan for the rest of the day. Later that afternoon, Jasmine visited one of the regional warehouses outside Charlotte. She hadn't announced the visit. She rarely did. She preferred seeing the workplace as it naturally operated. Employees looked surprised but relaxed when she arrived. She shook hands with forklift operators, asked warehouse associates about equipment, thanked drivers waiting for outbound loads. Near one loading dock, she noticed an older employee adjusting damaged packaging by hand. His name tag read, Frank. How long have you been here? She asked. 26 years. She smiled. You've probably forgotten more about this place than I'll ever know. Frank chuckled. My wife says I've forgotten plenty. Both laughed. Then Jasmine noticed him quietly stretching his back. Everything okay? Oh, I'm fine. She looked toward the loading area. Do these tables adjust? He shook his head. No. We've been lifting like this for years. She knelt beside the workstation, studying its height. Has anyone requested adjustable stations? Frank looked surprised. Couple times. What happened? They said replacing everything would cost too much. Jasmine remained silent for several seconds. Then she asked, how much does replacing an experienced employee cost? Frank blinked. No one's ever asked that. Neither had anyone else standing nearby. The following morning, Jasmine requested injury reports from every warehouse. Patterns quickly emerged. Lower back injuries, shoulder strains, repetitive stress. Most weren't severe, but together they represented thousands of lost work hours every year. She called David. I want a cost estimate. For what? Adjustable loading stations. He hesitated. That's a major investment. I know. Give me the numbers anyway. When David delivered the report 2 days later, the figures were significant. Replacing equipment across every warehouse would cost millions. He expected Jasmine to postpone the project. Instead, she asked a different question. What's the financial impact of workplace injuries over the next 5 years if we change nothing? David recalculated. The room grew quiet as the answer appeared. The long-term costs were even higher. Jasmine smiled gently. Sometimes the expensive decision is the one we don't make. David laughed. I had a feeling you'd say that. Word spread quickly. Employees weren't talking about new equipment. They were talking about something else. The new CEO actually came to the warehouse. She asked our opinion. She remembered my name. Stories traveled faster than official announcements. Not because Jasmine was trying to impress people, because people remembered how someone made them feel. Meanwhile, Ryan found himself adjusting to a role he had never imagined. One afternoon he reached for his phone to approve a major purchasing decision. Halfway through dialing, he stopped. That approval belonged to Jasmine now. He stared at the phone for a moment before putting it down. The feeling surprised him. He hadn't realized how much of his identity had become tied to being the final decision-maker. Without that responsibility, he felt strangely uncertain. Not unimportant, just different. That evening, he mentioned it to Thomas over dinner. I don't know who I'm supposed to be now. His father set down his fork. Who were you before you became CEO? Ryan smiled. I was 29. Thomas laughed. Try again. Ryan thought harder. I was. He stopped. The answer didn't come easily. His father nodded knowingly. That's worth paying attention to. What do you mean? When our identity becomes attached to a position. He folded his napkin carefully. Losing the position feels like losing ourselves. Ryan remained quiet. But you're still a husband, a son, a mentor, a colleague, a friend. Those roles didn't disappear. Ryan realized how rarely he had thought about himself outside of work. For years, introductions had begun the same way. I'm Ryan Mitchell, CEO of Mitchell Freight Solutions. Now that title belonged to someone else. That night, Jasmine arrived home later than usual. She found Ryan sitting on the back porch reading. He looked up as she stepped outside. Long day? She nodded. I visited the Charlotte warehouse. How'd it go? She smiled. I learned more in 2 hours than I could have learned from 20 reports. Ryan closed his book. I used to think reports told me everything. She sat beside him. They tell us what happened. He looked at her. People tell us why. The words settled gently between them. Neither realized it, but this was the longest, uninterrupted conversation they had shared in weeks. No defensiveness, no assumptions, no rushing to finish each other's sentences, just two people slowly learning a different way to communicate. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't perfect. But healing rarely announces itself with grand gestures. More often, it begins with small conversations, where someone finally feels heard. And for the first time in a long while, both Ryan and Jasmine left a conversation feeling exactly that. Monday evening settled quietly over Charlotte. The Mitchell home was unusually peaceful. The television stayed off. Neither of them reached for their laptops after dinner. For years, work had followed them home almost every night. Conversations about budgets, contracts, warehouse expansions, and staffing decisions often continued long after they left the office. Tonight felt different. Not because they had solved their problems, because neither of them wanted work to be the only thing connecting them anymore. Jasmine carried 2 mugs of chamomile tea onto the back patio. Ryan looked up from the notebook resting on his lap. I didn't know you were making tea. You look like you could use one. He accepted the mug with a grateful smile. Thanks. They sat quietly for several minutes, listening to crickets and the distant hum of evening traffic. Finally, Ryan spoke. Can I ask you something? You don't have to ask permission. He smiled faintly. I guess I'm still getting used to difficult conversations. Jasmine nodded. So am I. Ryan looked down at the steam rising from his mug. When did you start feeling like I wasn't listening? The question lingered between them. Jasmine didn't answer immediately. She wasn't trying to avoid it. She simply wanted to answer honestly, instead of emotionally. I don't think there was one specific day. Ryan waited. It happened gradually. She looked toward the yard. It started with little things. Like what? You'd ask for my opinion. He nodded. I'd give it. Another pause. And then you'd explain why your plan made more sense. Ryan lowered his eyes. I thought we were discussing ideas. We were. She smiled sadly. But eventually I noticed something. What? You usually asked because you wanted confirmation. Not perspective. Ryan leaned back in his chair. Hearing the words hurt. Not because they were unfair, because they were accurate. He replayed dozens of conversations in his mind. He remembered asking, what do you think? But before Jasmine could fully answer, he often responded with, here's why I was thinking. He had mistaken inviting someone to speak for genuinely listening. I honestly didn't know I was doing that. I know. Her answer surprised him. You do? I've never believed you were trying to dismiss me. She looked directly at him. I just think you became so confident in your ability to solve problems that you stopped becoming curious. Ryan remained silent. Curious. The word stayed with him. He realized that early in their marriage, he had asked Jasmine endless questions about books she enjoyed, how she approached difficult decisions, why she noticed details other people missed. Over time, those questions became fewer. Not because he cared less, because he assumed he already knew her. He suddenly understood how dangerous assumptions could become inside a marriage. The next morning, Ryan arrived at work before sunrise. Instead of going directly to his office, he wandered through the nearly empty building. Cleaning crews were finishing their shifts. The smell of fresh coffee drifted from the break room. He found himself standing outside the employee suggestion wall. Years earlier, he had approved the idea without giving it much thought. Employees could anonymously submit recommendations for improving safety, efficiency, or workplace culture. He had rarely stopped to read them. This morning, he did. One card read, the warehouse lighting in Nashville could be improved during night shifts. Another suggested better onboarding for new drivers. A third thanked the maintenance department for always responding quickly. Ryan kept reading. Many suggestions were practical. Some were creative. Others described problems that executives rarely saw. As he continued reading, he noticed something written at the bottom of several cards. Discussed with Jasmine. Or, Jasmine visited our location and recommended this. Or simply, thank you, Jasmine. None of the notes praised her title. They praised her attention. Ryan quietly smiled. Leadership, he was beginning to understand, wasn't always visible from the boardroom. Sometimes it was hidden in the ordinary moments no quarterly report could measure. Later that morning, Jasmine called her executive team together. I want to begin something new. Everyone looked toward her. Starting next month. She wrote 3 words on the whiteboard. Listen, learn, improve. No presentations. No prepared speeches. No executive updates. Miguel looked puzzled. Then what are the meetings for? We're going to spend 1 day each month, visiting different departments. Every executive? She nodded. Everyone. David raised an eyebrow. The accounting team too? Especially the accounting team. Soft laughter filled the room. Jasmine continued. If we expect employees to understand the challenges executives face. She paused. Executives should understand the challenges employees face. No one objected. In fact, several department heads seemed energized by the idea. Ryan watched quietly. A few weeks ago, he might have worried that such meetings would consume too much time. Now he found himself wondering why they had never done it before. That afternoon, Ryan knocked gently on Jasmine's office door. Do you have a minute? She looked up from her desk. Always. He stepped inside. I wanted your opinion. She smiled. Okay. He sat across from her, then stopped talking. Jasmine waited. After several seconds, she laughed softly. What? I almost explained my solution before asking the question. She smiled. I noticed. He rubbed the back of his neck. I'm trying to break the habit. I know. He opened a folder. I've been mentoring 3 regional managers. She nodded. I want to continue. I think you should. I also think I need to change how I mentor. She folded her hands. How so? I spend too much time teaching people how I solved problems. He paused. Maybe I should spend more time helping them think through their own. Jasmine's smile widened. I think that's a good idea. He looked at her. Can I ask another question? Of course. What would you do? She considered it carefully. I'd ask more questions than I answer. Ryan laughed. You really do believe questions are that powerful? I do. Why? Because good answers solve today's problem. She leaned forward slightly. Good questions help people solve tomorrow's. Ryan wrote the sentence in his notebook. Not because he wanted to remember her advice, because he wanted to practice it. As Ryan walked back to his office, he realized something had quietly changed. For the first time in years, he had asked Jasmine for guidance and listened without preparing a response. It seemed like a small moment. No one else in the company would ever know it happened. Yet sometimes the biggest changes in a relationship begin where no audience is watching. Not with dramatic apologies, not with expensive gifts, but with one person choosing curiosity over certainty, and another choosing patience over resentment. Neither Ryan nor Jasmine believed their marriage had suddenly been repaired. Too much history stood behind them for healing to happen in a single week. But they had begun creating something they had neglected for far too long. A conversation where both voices carried equal weight. And that, they were slowly learning, was where lasting respect begins. A month passed more quickly than either of them expected. The transition no longer dominated every conversation inside Mitchell Freight Solutions. Employees had settled into new routines. Clients continued signing contracts. Warehouses met delivery targets. From the outside, the company appeared stronger than ever. Inside Ryan and Jasmine's marriage, however, progress was slower. Not because either of them lacked commitment, because emotional habits built over years rarely disappear in a few weeks. One Wednesday afternoon, Jasmine received a call from Human Resources. We have a situation. What happened? 2 department managers. She listened quietly. They're arguing over responsibility for a delayed shipment. Has anyone spoken to them together? No, only separately. I'll come. 10 minutes later, she entered a small conference room. On one side, SAT Operations Manager Kevin Ross. Across from him, sat Transportation Supervisor Melissa Grant. Both looked frustrated. Jasmine greeted them with a smile. Thanks for waiting. Neither returned the smile. Kevin spoke first. Transportation ignored the loading schedule. Melissa immediately responded. Because operations changed it without notifying us. Jasmine raised one hand gently. Before we discuss solutions. She looked at Kevin. I'd like you to explain Melissa's perspective as fairly as you can. He frowned. What? Not your opinion. Her perspective. Kevin shifted uncomfortably. He looked across the table. I guess Ah, he sighed. If transportation wasn't notified, they would have scheduled drivers based on outdated information. Jasmine nodded. Thank you. She turned toward Melissa. Now your turn. Melissa smiled awkwardly. You want me to defend Kevin? I'd like you to understand him. Melissa thought for a moment. If operations changed the loading schedule, they were probably responding to new warehouse conditions. Kevin looked surprised. She had described his situation accurately. Jasmine leaned back. Interesting. Neither manager spoke. You both understood each other's challenges. So why did the conversation begin with blame instead of understanding? The room fell silent. Several minutes later, they left together, discussing ways to improve communication. Neither had won. Both had learned something. The story reached Ryan before the day ended. David stopped by his office. You heard about Kevin and Melissa? No. David explained the meeting. Ryan smiled. I would have handled that very differently. David laughed. I know. What would have I done? You probably would have asked who made the mistake. Ryan nodded. Probably. David continued. Jasmine asked them to explain each other's perspective first. Ryan sat quietly. Did it work? They solved the problem themselves. David left a few moments later. Ryan leaned back in his chair. For years he had believed leadership meant providing answers quickly. Jasmine seemed equally comfortable allowing other people to discover answers together. Neither approach was completely wrong, but one built greater confidence in others. That evening, Ryan arrived home first. He decided to cook dinner. Not because it was a special occasion, simply because Jasmine had been working late all week. He wasn't an extraordinary cook. His grilled chicken was usually a little too dry. His vegetables sometimes stayed in the oven longer than intended. Still, he tried. When Jasmine walked through the front door nearly an hour later, the smell of rosemary and garlic filled the kitchen. She looked surprised. I thought we were ordering takeout. Ryan smiled. So did I. She laughed. What changed? I remembered how many nights you've cooked after working just as late. She set her bag down slowly. You didn't have to. I know. He looked at the slightly overcooked vegetables. But I wanted to. During dinner, they talked very little about work. Instead, they discussed Jasmine's younger sister, who had recently started nursing school. Ryan shared a funny story about his father accidentally sending a text message to the entire family instead of one person. For nearly an hour, they simply enjoyed being husband and wife, instead of former CEO and current CEO. Jasmine noticed something. Ryan asked more questions than usual, not out of obligation, out of genuine curiosity. What was the best part of your day? The warehouse visit. What made it interesting? The employees. What did they teach you? She smiled. You've been asking a lot of questions lately. Ryan laughed. I'm practicing. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. It shows. Saturday morning brought the monthly listen, learn, improve, visit. Executives traveled to the company's oldest warehouse, the one Thomas Mitchell had opened nearly 3 decades earlier. Ryan joined the group without hesitation. Employees seemed pleased to see both of them. Frank, the warehouse associate Jasmine had met weeks earlier, greeted Ryan warmly. Morning, Mr. Mitchell. Morning, Frank. Ryan looked around the loading area. Several adjustable workstations had already been installed. They're working well? Frank smiled broadly. My back says thank you. Ryan laughed. I'll make sure finance hears that. Frank became serious. You know? Ryan waited. I've worked for this company under your father. Under you. And now under Jasmine. Ryan smiled. That's a long time. Frank nodded. Every leader taught me something. What did I teach you? Frank thought carefully. You taught us to think big. Ryan appreciated the answer. And Jasmine? Frank looked around the warehouse. She reminds us that people are the reason we think big. Ryan remained silent. It wasn't criticism. It was perspective. He thanked Frank before continuing the tour. Those words stayed with him long after they left the warehouse. That afternoon, Ryan found himself standing beside Jasmine as employees demonstrated new safety procedures. She watched quietly while operators explained recent improvements. Ryan leaned closer. Can I admit something? She looked at him. Always. I used to think leadership was mostly about direction. And now? I think it's also about attention. She smiled. What do you mean? I spent years asking where the company was going. He looked around the warehouse. You keep asking how people are getting there. Jasmine didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked toward employees laughing together during a break. My grandmother used to tell me something. Ryan waited. People rarely forget the person who made them feel seen. He nodded thoughtfully. I think she was right. So do I. As they walked back toward their cars, Ryan noticed a young supervisor hurrying toward them. Excuse me. They both stopped. The supervisor looked nervous. I just wanted to thank both of you. Ryan smiled. For what? The young man hesitated. I've only worked here 8 months. He looked at Jasmine. When you visited last month. You remembered my name today. She smiled. I remembered, because you told me your daughter had just been born. The supervisor looked genuinely touched. You remembered that? Of course. After he walked away, Ryan looked at his wife. You remember everyone's story. She shrugged modestly. I try. No. He smiled. You really do. For years, he had admired Jasmine's memory. Only now did he understand it wasn't memory alone. It was attention. She listened carefully enough that people felt worth remembering. Ryan realized he wanted to become that kind of listener too. Not because he hoped to regain a title. Because he wanted to become a better husband, a better colleague, and a better human being. For the first time in many years, his motivation wasn't proving himself. It was improving himself. And although neither of them could yet see where that journey would lead, they both sensed something important. Respect was no longer growing in only one direction. It was finally becoming mutual, intentional, and practiced. One ordinary conversation at a time. Early October brought the company's annual Leadership Summit, a 2-day event where regional managers from every office gathered in Charlotte to review performance, exchange ideas, and prepare for the coming year. For the first time in nearly a decade, Ryan wasn't the keynote speaker. The realization still caught him off guard. As he watched managers greet one another in the hotel lobby, he instinctively reached for the folder that usually held his opening remarks. Then he remembered. The speech belonged to Jasmine this year. Surprisingly, the thought no longer carried the same sting. Instead, it carried curiosity. He genuinely wanted to hear what she would say. The ballroom slowly filled with more than 300 employees. Warehouse supervisors sat beside regional directors. Dispatch managers chatted with customer service leaders. Unlike previous years, Jasmine had intentionally mixed seating assignments, so departments would spend time with people outside their usual circles. Interesting choice, David whispered to her before the program began. I don't want operations talking only to operations. She smiled. Good ideas rarely stay inside one department. David nodded. You've changed more than the seating chart. I hope so. Harold Whitmore stepped to the stage first. He welcomed everyone before introducing the company's new CEO. The applause was warm and genuine. Jasmine walked to the podium without rushing. She looked across the room for several seconds before speaking. When I was 12 years old, the room grew quiet. My grandfather gave me an old pocket watch that no longer worked. Several people smiled, wondering where the story was going. I asked him why he kept something that couldn't even tell time. She paused. He said, because every broken thing still has something to teach the person willing to pay attention. She held the audience's attention effortlessly. I didn't understand what he meant until years later. She looked around the ballroom. Businesses are a little like that. When something goes wrong, our first instinct is often to ask, who made the mistake? She shook her head gently. A better question is, what is this problem trying to teach us? Managers throughout the room nodded thoughtfully. If every mistake ends with blame, people become experts at hiding mistakes. But if every mistake becomes an opportunity to learn, people become comfortable telling the truth sooner. Ryan listened carefully. He had attended leadership conferences for years. He had heard speeches about profits, competition, innovation, market share. Jasmine was speaking about trust, and somehow, the room seemed even more engaged. After the keynote, employees broke into smaller workshops. Ryan joined a leadership discussion led by an outside consultant named Dr. Helen Morris. She began with an unusual exercise. I'd like everyone to write down one leadership habit you've changed in the past year. Pens immediately began moving. Ryan stared at the blank page. At first, nothing came to mind. Then he slowly wrote, I stopped believing that asking for someone's opinion means I've truly listened to it. He read the sentence twice. It felt uncomfortable, but it was honest. Dr. Morris invited volunteers to share. Several managers spoke about delegation. Others mentioned communication. When Ryan raised his hand, a few people looked surprised. He stood. I used to think listening meant giving people a chance to speak. He glanced around the room. I've realized those aren't the same thing. The consultant smiled encouragingly. Ryan continued. I often asked for input after I'd already decided what I wanted to do. A quiet murmur spread through the room. Not because people were judging him, because many recognized themselves in his words. I wasn't pretending to listen. He shook his head. I genuinely believed I was. He paused before finishing. But listening isn't measured by how long another person talks. It's measured by whether their perspective changes your own. The room fell silent. Dr. Morris smiled. That's one of the most honest leadership observations I've heard in a long time. Ryan sat down feeling strangely lighter. Admitting a weakness in front of colleagues once would have felt humiliating. Now it felt freeing. Later that afternoon, Jasmine attended a round table with warehouse supervisors. Instead of standing at the front, she pulled her chair into the circle. No presentations today. One supervisor laughed. Good. I didn't prepare one. Soft laughter filled the room. Jasmine smiled. I have one question. She looked around slowly. If you became CEO tomorrow, what's the first thing you'd change? For nearly 2 hours she mostly listened. Some ideas were small. Others were ambitious. One supervisor suggested rotating executives through warehouse shifts once each quarter. Another recommended mentoring programs between experienced drivers and new hires. A young manager proposed anonymous feedback for executives. Someone else hesitated before speaking. I don't know if this is appropriate. Jasmine smiled warmly. If it's respectful, it's appropriate. The supervisor took a breath. I think executives should spend less time talking during meetings. Several people laughed nervously. Jasmine laughed too. I'll add that to my list. No one felt embarrassed. The honesty was welcomed. That evening, attendees gathered for dinner. Ryan carried his plate toward an empty table when someone called his name. Mind if I join you? It was Kevin Ross, the operations manager. Please. They talked casually for several minutes before Kevin became thoughtful. Can I tell you something? Ryan nodded. I almost resigned last year. Ryan looked surprised. I had no idea. I never told anyone. What changed your mind? Kevin smiled. Jasmine. Ryan wasn't surprised anymore. She noticed I wasn't myself. Kevin nodded. She didn't ask about productivity. She asked if everything was okay at home. Ryan listened quietly. My wife had just started chemotherapy. Ryan's expression softened. I didn't know. Most people didn't. Kevin looked down at his coffee. Jasmine arranged a flexible schedule without making me feel guilty. He smiled. She also called every Friday for 3 months. Not to ask about work. To ask how my wife was doing. Ryan sat silently for a long moment. I never knew any of that. Kevin looked at him kindly. I don't think she wanted you to. After Kevin left, Ryan remained alone at the table. He wasn't jealous. He wasn't ashamed. He simply realized there were entire chapters of Jasmine's leadership he had never read, because he had been too busy writing his own. Later that night, Ryan found Jasmine standing on the hotel terrace overlooking the Charlotte skyline. The October air carried just enough chill to make the city feel peaceful. You disappeared, he said. I needed a little quiet. He joined her at the railing. I heard your keynote. She smiled. You survived it? I did. He laughed softly. It was better than mine ever were. She looked at him. You don't have to say that. I'm not saying it because you're my wife. He met her eyes. I'm saying it because it's true. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Jasmine asked the question she had been quietly carrying for weeks. Do you resent me? Ryan answered without hesitation. No. She searched his face. Not even a little. He thought carefully before speaking again. I resented what happened. He looked out across the city. But I don't resent you. He turned back toward her. The more I learn, the more I realize you didn't take anything from me. She felt tears threaten the corners of her eyes. You earned something I never stopped to notice. The words weren't dramatic. They weren't perfect. But they were genuine. For Jasmine, they meant more than any apology Ryan had offered so far. Because for the first time, he wasn't apologizing for a single moment. He was acknowledging a pattern. And recognizing a pattern is often the first step toward changing it. Neither of them pretended everything had been healed. Trust still needed time. Old habits would still resurface. There would be difficult conversations ahead. But as they stood together overlooking the city, both sensed that hope no longer felt fragile. It felt patient, and patient hope, they were learning, often lasts much longer than promises made too quickly. The following Monday began with an email that surprised every executive. It wasn't about quarterly earnings. It wasn't about expansion. It wasn't even about performance targets. The subject line simply read, Leadership Office Hours. Jasmine had introduced a new initiative. Every Tuesday morning from 8 until 10, any employee, from warehouse associate to regional manager, could schedule 15 minutes to speak directly with the CEO. No approval, no chain of command, no complicated process, just a conversation. The announcement immediately became one of the most discussed topics in the company. Some managers loved the idea, others worried employees would use it to complain about supervisors. Ryan quietly wondered how many people would actually sign up. By Monday afternoon, every available appointment for the next 6 weeks had been filled. Tuesday morning arrived. Jasmine expected difficult conversations. Instead, she met people carrying ordinary concerns. A dispatcher wanted to suggest a better scheduling system. A warehouse associate asked about tuition assistance. A customer service representative proposed translating company resources into Spanish for newer employees. None of the meetings lasted more than 15 minutes, yet each ended the same way. Thank you for listening. By 10 o'clock, Jasmine understood something important. People weren't coming because they expected the CEO to solve every problem. They were coming because they believed someone would finally hear them. Ryan watched the program from a distance. Late that afternoon, he stopped by David's office. So? David looked up from his computer. So? What are people saying about office hours? David leaned back. They're talking about being listened to. Ryan smiled faintly. Not about the decisions? Not really. He paused. I think most people understand they won't always get what they ask for. Ryan nodded. So, what matters? David answered without hesitation. They want to know someone considered their perspective before deciding. Ryan thanked him and walked away. That sentence echoed in his mind for the rest of the day. For years he had focused on making the right decisions. He had spent far less time making sure people understood they had been genuinely heard. Later that week, Ryan attended a mentoring session with 3 regional managers. In the past, these meetings had followed a familiar pattern. The managers described a problem. Ryan explained how he would solve it. The meeting ended. This time, he tried something different. A young manager named Brooke described rising employee turnover at her facility. Ryan instinctively thought of 3 possible solutions. He almost shared them immediately. Instead, he stopped himself. What do you think is causing it? Brooke looked surprised. I'm not completely sure. That's okay. He smiled. What possibilities have you considered? For the next 20 minutes, Ryan asked questions instead of giving answers. By the end of the conversation, Brooke had developed a plan that was stronger than the one Ryan had imagined. As everyone gathered their notes, she smiled. This was helpful. Ryan laughed. I hardly said anything. Exactly. She grinned. You made me think. After they left, Ryan sat alone in the conference room. He realized something unexpected. Listening required more discipline than speaking. Speaking filled silence. Listening trusted silence. It was a skill he had underestimated for years. That evening, Ryan arrived home carrying groceries. Jasmine looked up from the kitchen counter. I thought I'd cook. She smiled. So did I. He held up 2 bags. Then we'll cook together. They settled into an easy rhythm. Ryan chopped vegetables. Jasmine seasoned chicken. Soft jazz played in the background. The conversation drifted naturally between recipes, family stories, and memories from their first apartment. Ryan laughed as he remembered trying to assemble a bookshelf without reading the instructions. It collapsed in less than an hour. It collapsed in 15 minutes, Jasmine corrected, laughing. I was being generous. For a while, everything felt light. Then, Ryan asked a question. Can I tell you something I've been thinking about? Of course. I've apologized several times. She nodded. You have. But lately I've been wondering. He hesitated. Whether my apologies have been asking you to heal faster than you're ready. Jasmine stopped stirring the sauce. She turned toward him. What makes you think that? I notice myself looking for signs that everything's okay again. He sighed. That's not fair to you. She leaned against the counter. I appreciate your apologies. But trust doesn't follow a schedule. I know. No. She smiled gently. I think you're beginning to know. He nodded. I guess I kept hoping there would be one conversation that fixed everything. There usually isn't. She walked over and rested a hand lightly on his arm. Healing is often quieter than that. The next morning brought the first real disagreement they had experienced since the leadership transition. A national retailer offered Mitchell Freight Solutions a lucrative contract. Winning it would significantly increase annual revenue. The executive team gathered to discuss the proposal. Most people seemed enthusiastic. Ryan reviewed the numbers. It's a tremendous opportunity. Jasmine agreed. It is. But, she looked around the table. Our current teams are already operating near capacity. Several executives shifted in their seats. Ryan spoke carefully. We could hire more people. We could. But training takes time. David added. The financial upside is substantial. It is. Jasmine nodded. But accepting work we're not prepared to handle could damage relationships we've spent years building. Ryan leaned forward. I think we can manage it. Jasmine looked at him. I think we might. She paused. But I'm not confident enough to promise it. The room grew quiet. Months earlier, this conversation might have unfolded very differently. Ryan might have defended his position until everyone agreed. Jasmine might have quietly accepted the final decision despite lingering concerns. Instead, Ryan looked around the room. I'd like to hear everyone else's perspective. One by one, department heads shared their views. Some agreed with Ryan. Others shared Jasmine's concerns. After nearly an hour of discussion, the group reached a compromise. They would negotiate a phased rollout, instead of accepting the full contract immediately. The retailer agreed. The company gained new business, without overwhelming existing teams. As the meeting ended, Miguel smiled at Ryan. You handled that differently. Ryan laughed. I noticed. You changed your mind. I expanded it. Miguel grinned. Fair enough. Later that afternoon, Ryan knocked on Jasmine's office door. I owe you a thank you. She looked up. For what? If that meeting had happened 6 months ago. He smiled. I probably would have argued until everyone gave up. She laughed softly. Probably. This time? What? He shrugged. Everyone helped us reach a better answer. Jasmine closed the folder on her desk. That's the thing about healthy disagreement. He waited. It isn't about proving who's right. It's about making sure the best idea survives. Ryan nodded thoughtfully. As he walked back toward his office, he realized something profound had shifted inside him. He no longer measured his value by how often his ideas prevailed. He measured it by whether the team reached wiser decisions together. For years, he had believed leadership meant being the strongest voice in the room. Now he was beginning to understand that the strongest leaders often spend more time creating space for other voices than competing with them. The lesson wasn't easy. It required setting aside pride, certainty, and the need to be right. But each day he practiced it, he noticed something changing, not only inside the company, but inside his marriage. For the first time in years, Jasmine wasn't carrying the weight of hoping to be heard. And Ryan was discovering that listening wasn't the opposite of leading. Sometimes it was leadership in its purest form. Several weeks later, the excitement surrounding the leadership transition had faded. The headlines inside the company newsletter moved on to new warehouse openings, customer milestones, and employee recognition. To anyone looking from the outside, Mitchell Freight Solutions had adjusted remarkably well. Revenue remained strong. Employee satisfaction had risen. Turnover had fallen to its lowest level in 5 years. The board was pleased. Investors were optimistic. But success had a way of creating its own illusion. It often convinced people that if life looked healthy from a distance, it must also feel healthy up close. Ryan and Jasmine knew better. Their marriage was improving. It wasn't healed. One Friday evening, they attended a charity gala benefiting workforce development programs across North Carolina. The event brought together business owners, non-profit leaders, and local officials. It was the kind of gathering they had attended together for years. Ryan adjusted the cuff of his tuxedo as they entered the ballroom. You look nervous. Jasmine smiled. I always do at these events. You've spoken in front of hundreds of employees. That's different. How? I know them. She glanced around the room. I don't know what these people expect. Ryan smiled. You don't have to impress anyone. She looked at him with amused disbelief. Easy for you to say. It used to be. She tilted her head. What changed? He thought for a moment. I spent years believing people expected me to have the right answers. And now? I've realized most people just want honesty. Jasmine smiled softly. I like this version of you. Ryan laughed. I'm still getting used to him. As they moved through the ballroom, people greeted them warmly. Some congratulated Jasmine on her appointment as CEO. Others thanked Ryan for remaining involved during the transition. The conversations were respectful, balanced. Neither felt overlooked. Near the end of dinner, the evening's host approached the stage. We'd like to recognize one local business for its commitment to employee development. Applause filled the room. The Workforce Leadership Award goes to, he smiled, Mitchell Freight Solutions. Ryan instinctively looked toward Jasmine. She looked equally surprised. Would Ryan Mitchell and Jasmine Mitchell please join us on stage? As they walked together through the applause, Ryan quietly stepped half a pace behind her. It wasn't intentional. It simply felt natural. The presenter handed Jasmine the award. You've built an extraordinary culture. She accepted it graciously. Then she did something no one expected. Before speaking, she handed the award to Ryan. The audience looked confused. She smiled into the microphone. "This belongs to everyone who helped build our company." She glanced toward Ryan. "My husband included." Ryan shook his head gently. "No," she whispered. "Take it." He whispered back. "We'll hold it together." Without another word, they both placed a hand on the award. The photographers captured the moment, not because it was dramatic, because it reflected something genuine. Neither was trying to stand in front of the other anymore. On the drive home, rain dotted the windshield. The city lights reflected across wet streets. Ryan finally broke the comfortable silence. "Why did you hand me the award?" Jasmine looked out the window. "Because it wasn't mine alone. You earned it." "We earned different parts of it." Ryan smiled faintly. "I spent years accepting recognition too easily. You also worked hard." "I did." He nodded. "But I wasn't always aware of whose shoulders I was standing on." Jasmine didn't respond immediately. Then she quietly said, "Awareness changes relationships." The following Tuesday, Ryan met his longtime friend, Marcus Bennett, for lunch. Marcus owned a manufacturing company nearby. They had known each other since college. After ordering, Marcus leaned back in his chair. "So?" Ryan laughed. "I know that look." "What look?" "The one that says you're about to ask something personal." Marcus smiled unapologetically. "How are you really doing?" Ryan didn't answer immediately. A few months earlier, he would have offered the standard response. "Busy. Everything's fine." This time, he chose differently. "I'm learning." Marcus waited. "I spent years believing confidence meant never questioning myself. And now? I question myself more." Marcus frowned. "That sounds exhausting." "Sometimes." Ryan stirred his coffee thoughtfully. "But it's also making me a better listener." Marcus nodded slowly. "You know..." He smiled. "My wife told me something years ago." "What?" "Self-confidence without self-awareness eventually becomes arrogance." Ryan laughed quietly. "That sounds familiar." "It should." Marcus pointed toward him. "Most of us learn it the hard way." Later that afternoon, Jasmine reviewed employee engagement surveys with Human Resources. One response caught her attention. "I feel more comfortable sharing concerns because I believe they'll be taken seriously." Another read, "Managers seem to listen more carefully now than they used to." She smiled. "Interesting." The HR director looked over. "People aren't only noticing leadership changes." She tapped the report. "They're noticing cultural changes." The director nodded. "It starts at the top." Jasmine looked thoughtful. "No." The director frowned. "I think it starts wherever someone chooses to treat another person with respect." That evening, Ryan arrived home carrying a small notebook. Jasmine noticed it immediately. "New project?" He smiled. "Sort of." She sat beside him on the couch. "What's in it?" He handed it to her. The first page contained a handwritten title, "Things I Don't Want to Forget." She looked up curiously. Ryan rubbed the back of his neck. "I realized something. I remember meetings, numbers, deadlines." He smiled awkwardly. "But I don't always remember what people tell me about themselves." She flipped through the pages. There were short notes. "Kevin's wife begins radiation next month. Claire's son has his college interview on Friday. Frank's granddaughter starts kindergarten. Miguel's father is recovering from surgery." Jasmine looked at him in surprise. "You wrote all these down?" "I figured." He shrugged. "If something matters enough for someone to share, it should matter enough for me to remember." Emotion quietly filled Jasmine's eyes. Not because of the notebook itself, because of what it represented. This wasn't a grand romantic gesture. It wasn't an expensive gift. It was evidence that Ryan was changing his habits, instead of merely changing his words. She closed the notebook gently. "I have to tell you something." "What?" "I've been waiting for you to become the man I always believed you could be." Ryan looked at her carefully. "And?" She smiled. "I think you're becoming him." He wanted to say thank you. Instead, he simply reached across the couch and took her hand. Neither of them mistook the moment for the end of their journey. Trust still needed consistency. Healing still required patience. Old patterns could still return when stress increased. But they also understood something they hadn't fully appreciated before. Real growth rarely announces itself through dramatic transformations. It reveals itself through ordinary choices, repeated often enough that they slowly become part of who someone is. And for the first time in many years, both Ryan and Jasmine could see those ordinary choices adding up to something neither title nor promotion had ever been able to create. A marriage built not on assumptions, but on intentional respect. Chapter 5, Part 2. By mid-November, Preparations for the holiday season had transformed every Mitchell Freight Solutions facility. Loading docks stayed busy from sunrise until well after dark. Dispatch centers coordinated hundreds of additional deliveries each day. Customer service teams handled an endless stream of calls. For the logistics industry, the busiest weeks of the year had arrived. Pressure increased. Deadlines became tighter. Small mistakes carried larger consequences. If there was ever a time when old leadership habits might return, this was it. On Monday morning, Jasmine entered the executive conference room 15 minutes before the weekly operations meeting. One by one, department leaders arrived. Ryan was the last. He carried a notebook instead of his laptop. Miguel noticed. "No computer today?" Ryan smiled. "I realized I spend too much time looking at a screen while people are talking." David laughed. "Trying something new?" "I'm trying to be more present." Jasmine noticed the exchange but said nothing. She simply smiled to herself. When the meeting began, Ryan did something else that surprised everyone. Instead of sitting at the head of the table, a habit he had kept even after stepping down as CEO, he chose a seat along the side. No one commented, but everyone noticed. Sometimes leadership changed through policies. Sometimes it changed through seating arrangements. The meeting focused on holiday capacity planning. Forecasts showed shipping demand increasing nearly 20% over the previous year. Operations teams were confident. Transportation was less certain. Melissa Grant reviewed several potential bottlenecks. If severe weather hits the Midwest, she pointed to a logistics map. Our backup routes will become overloaded within 48 hours. A few executives immediately began offering solutions. Ryan almost joined them. Instead, he looked toward one of the newest managers in the room. Nathan Alvarez had been promoted only 3 months earlier. He had remained silent throughout the discussion. Ryan noticed. "Nathan," the young manager looked up, startled. "Yes? We haven't heard from you yet." Nathan hesitated. "I wasn't sure my opinion would help." Ryan smiled. "I wouldn't have asked otherwise." Nathan slowly stood. "I think we're preparing for the wrong problem." The room became quiet. He continued. "We're assuming weather will be our biggest challenge." He pointed toward another section of the forecast. "Our staffing projections worry me more." Several executives leaned closer. Nathan explained that illness during previous holiday seasons had reduced staffing much more than expected. He suggested cross-training additional employees before peak season rather than waiting until shortages occurred. Melissa looked back at her reports. "I completely missed that." David nodded. "He's right." Within minutes, the discussion shifted. A revised staffing plan was approved. As everyone packed their notes, Miguel quietly leaned toward Ryan. "Good catch." Ryan frowned. "What do you mean?" "You noticed the quietest voice in the room." Ryan looked toward Nathan, who was speaking confidently with several senior managers. He smiled. "I almost didn't." After the meeting, Jasmine caught up with Ryan in the hallway. "You've developed an interesting habit." "What habit?" "You watch people who haven't spoken." Ryan thought about it. "I guess I do." "Why?" He smiled. "Because, for a long time, I was usually watching the people who agreed with me." Jasmine laughed softly. "I've noticed." That Friday evening, Ryan received a phone call from his father. "Busy? A little? Come by if you have time." An hour later, Ryan pulled into the driveway of the house where he had grown up. Thomas Mitchell was in the garage, restoring an old wooden workbench. Ryan picked up a piece of sandpaper. "You still refuse to throw this thing away?" Thomas smiled. "It's older than you are. It also weighs more than my truck." His father laughed. "Probably." For a while, they worked in comfortable silence. Eventually, Thomas spoke. "I heard good things about the leadership summit." Ryan nodded. "It went well." "And you?" Ryan thought carefully. "I think I'm changing." Thomas kept sanding. "What makes you say that?" "I don't feel the need to prove I'm the smartest person in every room anymore." Thomas stopped working. He looked directly at his son. "Do you know why I stepped down when I did?" Ryan frowned. "You told everyone it was time." His father nodded. "That was part of it." He rested both hands on the old bench. "But there was another reason." Ryan waited. "I realized the company no longer needed me to be the center of everything." The words settled quietly between them. Thomas continued. "The greatest compliment a leader can receive is becoming unnecessary." Ryan looked confused. His father smiled. "I don't mean unimportant. I mean successful enough that others can thrive without depending on you." Ryan had never considered leadership that way. For years he had measured success by how indispensable he was. Now he wondered if true success looked exactly the opposite. The next week brought an unexpected challenge. A major snowstorm closed highways across several states. Deliveries slowed. Drivers became stranded overnight. Customers demanded updates. Phones rang constantly. The executive team gathered immediately. Everyone moved with urgency. Melissa coordinated alternate routes. David reviewed financial exposure. Warehouse managers adjusted loading schedules. Jasmine calmly directed resources where they were needed most. Ryan noticed something. No one was waiting for a single person to solve everything. People trusted one another. Departments communicated openly. The culture Jasmine had worked so hard to build was now carrying the company through one of its most stressful weeks. Late that evening, after nearly 12 exhausting hours, Jasmine stood in the operations center reviewing shipment reports. Ryan walked over carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You've forgotten dinner." She accepted the cup. "So have you." They shared a tired smile. Ryan looked across the room. Several employees were still working. "They're handling this well." "They are. You've built something special." Jasmine shook her head. "We've built something special." Ryan smiled. Months earlier, he would have corrected her. Now he simply accepted the word, "we." It no longer threatened his identity. It strengthened it. By Thursday morning, the storm had passed. Most delayed shipments were already moving again. Customer complaints were significantly lower than expected. The board sent a message thanking every department for its teamwork. Harold Whitmore added one final sentence. "Strong systems matter. Strong relationships matter even more." Ryan read the message twice. He looked around the office. People were tired. Some looked exhausted. Yet they were smiling. Not because the week had been easy, because they had faced it together. As he walked toward Jasmine's office, he realized another quiet truth. Months earlier, he had admired her because she was succeeding as CEO. Now, he admired her for something much deeper. She had created an environment where people didn't have to choose between being competent and being compassionate. Both could exist at the same time. And perhaps that was the kind of legacy worth leaving. Not one person's success, but a culture where everyone had room to grow. Ryan knocked gently on Jasmine's open office door. She looked up. "Everything okay?" He smiled. "Better than okay." She raised an eyebrow. "What happened?" He leaned against the doorway. "I think I'm finally starting to understand the difference between leading people." He paused, smiling warmly. "And walking with them." Jasmine returned the smile. It was a simple sentence. Yet it reflected a transformation that no promotion, title, or award could have accomplished. Respect had become partnership. And partnership, they were learning, was the strongest foundation any marriage or any company could hope to build. As Ryan slowly learns that true leadership begins with listening, and that real love is built on respect, one question remains. Do you think people can truly change, or do they simply become better at hiding who they've always been? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective. If this chapter spoke to you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next chapter of Ryan and Jasmine's journey. Sometimes, the strongest relationships aren't the ones that never face hardship. They're the ones where both people choose to keep growing, one conversation at a time. The first snowfall of the year arrived quietly. Charlotte rarely experienced heavy snow, but the light blanket covering rooftops and sidewalks was enough to slow the city into a gentler pace. From the window of the executive floor, Jasmine watched employees arriving a little earlier than usual, brushing snow from their coats before stepping inside. She smiled. There was something comforting about ordinary mornings. Months earlier, every day had seemed defined by one enormous event. Now life had returned to smaller moments, and sometimes smaller moments revealed the biggest changes. Ryan was already in the office when Jasmine reached the executive floor. She raised an eyebrow. "You beat me here." He looked up from a stack of reports. "Barely. I thought you hated mornings." "I still do." She laughed. "So why are you here before sunrise?" He pointed toward a conference room down the hall. "I have breakfast with the new management trainees." "You volunteered for that?" "I did." Jasmine smiled. "I hope they're ready." "So do I." At 8 o'clock, 12 newly promoted supervisors gathered around a long conference table. Some looked excited. Others looked nervous. Most expected Ryan to deliver a polished leadership presentation. Instead, he placed a small notebook in the center of the table. One of the trainees asked, "What's that?" Ryan smiled. "My biggest leadership teacher." The group exchanged confused looks. "It doesn't look very impressive." "It isn't." He opened the notebook. The pages were filled with handwritten notes, mistakes, lessons, questions, conversations he never wanted to forget. A young supervisor named Elena frowned. "Those are mistakes?" Ryan nodded. "Every one of them." Another trainee looked surprised. You keep a record of your mistakes? I keep a record of what they taught me. The room grew quiet. Ryan continued. When I first became CEO, I believed confidence meant pretending I already knew everything. He looked around the table. I was wrong. He paused before adding, the fastest way to stop growing is convincing yourself you've already arrived. Several trainees immediately began taking notes. Instead of lecturing, Ryan asked everyone to introduce themselves, not with their job titles, but by answering one question. What is one experience that shaped the way you lead? The answers surprised everyone. One supervisor spoke about caring for an aging parent. Another described serving in the military. Someone else shared how working night shifts while attending college taught patience. As each person spoke, Ryan wrote brief notes. Not because he planned to evaluate them, because he wanted to remember them. When the session ended, Elena lingered behind. I've never had a leader ask that question before. Ryan smiled. I wish I'd started asking it years ago. Across the building, Jasmine met with the Executive Planning Committee. The agenda included expansion into 2 neighboring states. The financial projections looked promising. The operational plan was solid. Everything pointed toward moving forward. Still, Jasmine hesitated. Harold noticed. You have concerns. I have questions. What kind? She closed the proposal. We've spent the last several months strengthening our culture. The board listened. I don't want growth to outpace who we are. One board member responded. Growth always creates pressure. It does. Jasmine nodded. But pressure shouldn't force us to abandon what made us successful. Harold smiled. What do you recommend? A slower rollout. A few members looked uncertain. One asked, wouldn't that reduce short-term profit? It probably would, she answered calmly. But protecting long-term trust is often more valuable than maximizing short-term numbers. The room fell silent. Harold looked around the table. I'd like everyone to think about that before we vote. Later that afternoon, Ryan and Jasmine met for coffee in the company cafe. Employees passed by, greeting them naturally. The conversation drifted from work to weekend plans. Then Ryan asked, do you ever worry? About what? That people expect you to always know the right answer. Jasmine smiled knowingly. Every week. What do you do with that feeling? She stirred her coffee. I remind myself something. What? My responsibility isn't to know everything. It's to create an environment where the best answers can be found. Ryan leaned back. I like that. I borrowed it. From who? My grandmother. He laughed. She keeps getting wiser every time you quote her. Jasmine smiled. That's because I understand her better now than I did when I was younger. That evening, Ryan stayed late to finish reviewing quarterly reports. As he packed his briefcase, he noticed someone standing outside his office. Nathan Alvarez. You have a minute? Of course. Nathan stepped inside. I wanted some advice. Ryan gestured toward a chair. What's going on? Nathan hesitated. I was promoted quickly. Ryan nodded. I know. I think some of the older employees resent me. Ryan listened without interrupting. I've tried proving myself. Nathan sighed. But the harder I try, the more distant everyone seems. Ryan remained quiet for several seconds. Months earlier, he would have answered immediately. Now he asked, what makes you believe they're looking for proof? Nathan blinked. I don't know. Ryan smiled gently. When I was younger, I thought respect came from demonstrating competence. He folded his hands. Competence matters. But people usually decide whether to trust you long before they decide whether to admire your resume. Nathan looked thoughtful. So, what should I do? Ryan smiled. Tomorrow morning. Walk through the warehouse. Nathan nodded. And? Don't talk about yourself. Ask people what makes their job difficult. Nathan looked puzzled. That's it? That's enough for one day. The following afternoon, Nathan returned. You were right. Ryan laughed. I've learned not to say that too quickly. Nathan smiled. I didn't solve anything. You weren't trying to. I just listened. Ryan waited, and one mechanic spent 20 minutes explaining a problem that's been frustrating the entire maintenance team. What did you learn? Nathan smiled. That he didn't need my expertise. He needed my attention. Ryan couldn't help smiling. It was the same lesson he himself had spent months learning. The lesson continued moving from one person to another, quietly shaping the culture of the company. Not through speeches, not through policies, but through ordinary conversations where people chose to value understanding over assumptions. As Ryan looked out across the warehouse floor, he realized leadership had become something beautifully different. It was no longer about standing at the front with all the answers. It was about walking beside others, asking better questions, and making room for people to become their best. And perhaps the most meaningful part of that transformation wasn't that Ryan had changed. It was that his change was now inspiring change in others. The respect Jasmine had modeled was no longer hers alone. It was becoming part of the culture they were building together. One conversation, one decision, and one person at a time. The following week, Mitchell Freight Solutions hosted its annual Community Partnership Day, an event that brought employees away from desks, loading docks and conference rooms to volunteer throughout Charlotte. Some painted classrooms at neighborhood schools. Others packed meals at local food banks. Several teams planted trees in city parks. Instead of assigning executives to separate appearances, Jasmine asked everyone, from board members to warehouse supervisors, to work alongside employees. No reserved tables. No Belium special treatment. We're all volunteers today. The idea was simple. Serve together, learn together, return to work. Understanding one another a little better. Ryan found himself assigned to a neighborhood community center that was being renovated for after-school programs. His team included a forklift operator named Luis, 2 customer service representatives, an accountant, and a maintenance technician he had only met once. Everyone received paint rollers and safety goggles. Luis laughed as Ryan struggled to open a paint can. You've negotiated million-dollar contracts. Ryan smiled. Apparently paint cans are tougher. The group burst into laughter. For the next several hours, job titles disappeared. They talked about favorite restaurants, children, weekend hobbies, college football, family traditions. No one discussed quarterly reports. As the walls slowly changed from faded beige to bright blue, Ryan realized something. People became easier to understand when conversations weren't centered on work. During lunch, volunteers gathered outside with boxed meals. Ryan sat beside Luis beneath a large oak tree. Luis looked thoughtful. Can I ask you something? Of course. When you stepped down, were you angry? Ryan considered the question. I was hurt. Luis nodded. I would have been too. Ryan looked across the playground where several employees were assembling new basketball hoops. For a while, I confused losing a position with losing my value. Luis remained quiet. But they're different things. What helped you realize that? Ryan smiled. My wife. Luis laughed. That doesn't surprise me. She kept treating me like I mattered. Even when I wasn't acting like I believed it. Luis stared at the ground for a moment. My father retired last year. He still introduces himself by his old job. Ryan nodded slowly. A lot of us spend years attaching our identity to what we do. And when that changes, we have to remember who we are. Neither spoke for several moments. Sometimes, silence carried a conversation further than words. Across town, Jasmine spent the morning helping organize books inside a newly renovated elementary school library. Children wandered through the room, excitedly picking up books and asking volunteers endless questions. A little girl approached Jasmine, holding 2 novels. I can't decide. Jasmine smiled. Which one makes you more curious? The little girl looked back and forth between the covers. This one. Then start there. What if it's not my favorite? Jasmine smiled warmly. Books are funny. Sometimes, the one you almost didn't choose becomes the one you never forget. The little girl nodded seriously before running away. One of the teachers, Mrs. Dawson, smiled. You talk to children the same way you talk to executives. Jasmine laughed softly. I've never thought about it. You ask questions instead of giving instructions. Mrs. Dawson placed another stack of books onto a shelf. It makes people feel trusted. Jasmine reflected on that observation for the rest of the afternoon. Near the end of the volunteer day, everyone gathered back at company headquarters for a simple appreciation dinner. No speeches had been planned, just food and conversation. As employees filled the room, Harold Whitmore quietly walked to the microphone. I know we promised no speeches. Soft laughter spread through the crowd. I'll keep this short. He looked around the room. When I joined this board, I believed our greatest asset was our fleet. He smiled. Then I thought it was our technology. He paused. I've changed my mind. The room grew quiet. Our greatest asset is the way people treat one another. Applause filled the room. Harold looked toward Ryan and Jasmine. That culture didn't happen by accident. Neither of them stood. Neither tried to take credit. They simply applauded, along with everyone else. The next morning, Ryan arrived to find an envelope on his desk. There was no signature. Inside was a handwritten note. Thank you for asking about my family every Monday morning. It reminds me that someone notices when life gets heavy. Ryan turned the note over. Nothing else was written. He quietly placed it inside the notebook he carried everywhere. A few minutes later, another employee stopped by. "I heard about the mentoring breakfast." Ryan smiled. "Word travels fast." "It does. I was wondering." "Whoa," the employee hesitated. "Would you consider doing something similar for supervisors who aren't in management training?" Ryan looked surprised. "You'd be interested?" "I think several of us would." Ryan smiled. "I'd love to." After the employee left, Ryan realized something that would have seemed impossible only months earlier. People weren't seeking him because he had once been CEO. They were seeking him because they trusted the kind of leader he was becoming. The realization felt quieter than professional success, but somehow far more meaningful. That afternoon, Jasmine reviewed proposals for the coming fiscal year when someone knocked gently on her open office door. "Come in." It was Melissa. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all." Melissa stepped inside carrying a folder. "I wanted to show you something." She placed several pages on the desk. "What am I looking at?" "A peer coaching program." Jasmine scanned the proposal. Experienced employees would mentor newer team members across departments, creating relationships that extended beyond formal reporting lines. "I've been thinking about how much we've all learned from one another this year." Melissa smiled. "I don't want that to stop." Jasmine looked up. "This is excellent." "I hoped you'd think so." "I do." She closed the folder. "But I'd like you to lead it." Melissa blinked. "Really?" "It was your idea. You understand it better than anyone." Melissa left the office smiling. As the door closed, Jasmine leaned back in her chair. Leadership, she thought, wasn't measured by how many great ideas came from one person. It was measured by how many people felt confident enough to contribute their own. That evening, Ryan and Jasmine sat on their back porch, wrapped in light blankets, as the sun disappeared beyond the trees. The air carried the crisp feeling of late autumn. Ryan broke the comfortable silence. "Can I ask you something?" "You usually do." He smiled. "When you became CEO, were you ever afraid you'd become someone different?" Jasmine answered honestly. "Yes." "What helped?" She looked toward the fading sky. "I stopped asking whether success would change me." He listened carefully. "I started asking whether success would reveal who I already was." Ryan considered that for a long moment. "I've been asking myself the opposite." "What do you mean?" "I've been wondering who I was before I started believing my title defined me." Jasmine reached for his hand. "Maybe you're discovering him now." Ryan looked at her with quiet gratitude. Months ago, that sentence might have sounded like encouragement. Now it felt like recognition. Not because his journey was complete, but because someone who had known him through both his strengths and his blind spots could finally see the man he was becoming. For Ryan, there was no greater affirmation than that. Winter settled comfortably over Charlotte as the year drew to a close. The pace inside Mitchell Freight Solutions slowed just enough for people to breathe again. Holiday shipments had been delivered. Customer satisfaction exceeded expectations. The busiest season of the year was behind them. For the first time in months, employees began using vacation days they had postponed. The office felt different, not quieter, lighter. One Monday morning, Jasmine walked through the headquarters without announcing herself. She carried neither a folder nor a tablet. She simply wanted to see people. Near the customer service department, she noticed Claire sitting unusually still at her desk. Normally, Claire greeted everyone with a cheerful smile. Today, she stared at her computer without typing. Jasmine stopped beside her. "Good morning." Claire looked up quickly. "Oh, good morning." Jasmine immediately noticed the tiredness in her eyes. "Do you have a minute?" Claire nodded. They stepped into a nearby meeting room. Jasmine didn't begin with work. "How are you?" Claire gave the familiar answer almost everyone gave. "I'm fine." Jasmine smiled gently. "I'm glad." She waited. Silence filled the room. Nearly 30 seconds passed. Then Claire quietly said, "I'm actually not." Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. "My mother was admitted to the hospital yesterday." Jasmine handed her a box of tissues. "I'm sorry." Claire nodded. "I didn't want anyone thinking I couldn't handle work." Jasmine listened without interrupting. When Claire finished, Jasmine asked only one question. "What do you need from us?" Claire looked surprised. "I don't know." "That's okay. You don't have to figure it out alone." Together, they worked out a temporary schedule that allowed Claire to spend afternoons at the hospital while teammates covered the remaining hours. As Claire prepared to leave the room, she stopped. "I expected to explain why I deserved flexibility." Jasmine smiled. "You don't have to earn compassion." Ryan watched the interaction from the hallway. Later that afternoon, he knocked lightly on Jasmine's office door. I heard about Claire. Jasmine nodded. She's going through a difficult time. Ryan sat across from her desk. You always ask the same question. What question? What do you need? She smiled. I've found it's usually more helpful than assuming I already know. Ryan laughed quietly. I've started asking that at home too. Oh? When my sister called last week. Hey, what happened? She was overwhelmed planning Christmas. Jasmine nodded. What did you do? I almost started giving advice. He smiled. Then I stopped. And? I asked what she needed. What did she say? She needed someone to listen. Jasmine laughed softly. Funny how often that's the answer. Later that week, Human Resources launched Melissa's peer coaching program. More than 80 employees volunteered during the first day. The response exceeded every expectation. Experienced warehouse workers partnered with recent hires. Dispatchers mentored customer service representatives to better understand delivery challenges. Finance employees spent time inside operations. Departments that had once worked alongside one another now truly worked with one another. The atmosphere changed almost immediately. Problems reached solutions faster because relationships already existed. People weren't afraid to ask questions. They knew the person on the other end of the phone. At the first coaching luncheon, Ryan stood near the back of the room, watching conversations unfold. Nathan approached him carrying 2 cups of coffee. I figured you'd want one. Ryan accepted it gratefully. Thanks. Nathan smiled. You know. I've been thinking. Ryan waited. When I first asked for your advice, I expected leadership techniques. Ryan laughed. Instead you got homework. Nathan grinned. You told me to walk through the warehouse. And? It changed everything. He looked across the room. I know more about my team now than I did after months of meetings. Ryan nodded. People rarely become real to us through reports. They become real through conversations. Nathan smiled. I'll remember that. Ryan quietly thought, so will I. A few days before Christmas, the board held its final meeting of the year. The agenda was short. Financial results, expansion updates, planning for the new year. As the meeting concluded, Harold closed his folder. Before we leave, I'd like to share something. Everyone looked toward him. I've served on corporate boards for nearly 25 years. He smiled. I've seen companies become larger, wealthier, more efficient. He paused. I've rarely seen one become kinder. The room remained silent. Harold looked around the table. Kindness is often misunderstood. People mistake it for weakness. He shook his head. It takes strength to treat people well when you're under pressure. He turned toward Jasmine. You've reminded all of us of that. Then he looked at Ryan. And you've reminded us that real leaders never stop learning. Neither of them spoke. Neither needed to. Sometimes accepting appreciation gracefully was enough. Christmas Eve arrived with clear skies and cold air. Ryan and Jasmine hosted both of their families at home. The house smelled of cinnamon, roasted vegetables and fresh bread. Children ran through the hallway laughing. Thomas sat in the living room helping his youngest grandson assemble a toy train. Marcus stopped by with his wife and homemade pie. The evening felt comfortably ordinary. After dinner, everyone gathered around the fireplace. Ryan's niece, Emma, climbed onto the sofa beside him. Uncle Ryan? Yes? What do you do at work now? The adults nearby smiled, waiting for his answer. Months earlier, Ryan might have replied, I used to be CEO. Instead, he smiled at Emma. I help people become better leaders. Emma considered that. So, you teach? Ryan laughed. I guess I do. She smiled proudly. That's cool. The simplicity of her response stayed with him. Children often ignored the titles adults worked so hard to protect. They cared about purpose, not position. Later that night, after the last guest had gone home, Ryan and Jasmine stepped outside onto the porch. Snowflakes drifted gently through the porch light. The neighborhood had grown quiet. Ryan looked toward the stars. This year's been different. Jasmine smiled. It certainly has. I spent a long time thinking losing my title was the hardest thing that happened. She waited. It wasn't. What was? He looked at her, realizing how much of you I'd been overlooking. She squeezed his hand. You see me now? I do. And you know something? What? I think I'm finally seeing myself more clearly too. They stood together in comfortable silence. Neither felt the need to fill it. Months ago, silence between them often carried distance. Now it carried peace, not because every wound had disappeared, but because they had learned not to fear honest conversations. As they watched the snow continue to fall, both understood that love hadn't returned because circumstances became easier. It had grown stronger because two people had chosen humility over pride, curiosity over assumption, and partnership over ego. The lessons they had learned were no longer reserved for boardrooms or leadership meetings. They had become part of everyday life. And that, they both realized, was where lasting change truly belonged. The first week of January arrived with fresh calendars, new goals, and the familiar energy that accompanies a new year. At Mitchell Freight Solutions, employees returned from the holidays carrying stories about family gatherings, road trips, and children excitedly showing off new toys. The headquarters buzzed with renewed optimism. In previous years, the first executive meeting had always centered on one question: how much can we grow this year? This year, Jasmine opened the meeting differently. She stood beside a whiteboard, with a single sentence written across the top. What kind of company do we want to become? The room remained quiet. No charts appeared on the screen. No financial projections filled the walls. Instead, Jasmine looked around the table. I believe growth matters. Several people nodded. So do profitability and innovation. She smiled. But if someone joined our company today and worked here for 5 years, what would you hope they say about us when they leave? For a moment, no one answered. Then Melissa spoke first. I'd want them to say they felt respected. Miguel nodded. I'd want them to say they learned something every year. David smiled. I'd want them to say they trusted the people they worked with. One by one, every executive contributed. Not a single answer mentioned revenue, or market share, or expansion. Ryan quietly noticed the pattern. When people were invited to think beyond numbers, they almost always talked about people. Over the following weeks, those conversations spread throughout the company. Warehouse teams held similar discussions. Customer service departments created their own commitments. Regional offices sent in ideas for improving workplace culture. One office introduced monthly appreciation breakfasts, where employees recognized one another instead of waiting for managers to do it. Another created a mentorship circle for new parents returning to work. None of the ideas had come from the executive floor. That was exactly what Jasmine had hoped would happen. Culture, she believed, became strongest when people felt ownership of it. One afternoon, Ryan received an invitation from Elena, one of the management trainees. The subject line simply read, "Would you visit our team meeting?" He accepted immediately. When he arrived, he expected to answer questions. Instead, Elena welcomed him with a smile. "We don't need a presentation." Ryan laughed. "That's a relief. We'd like your feedback." The group had spent the past month developing ways to improve communication between supervisors and hourly employees. Each person presented one idea. Ryan listened carefully. When they finished, everyone looked toward him. "So," Elena asked, "what would you change?" Ryan remained thoughtful for several seconds. Finally, he smiled. "I have one suggestion." Pens immediately lifted. "Before you launch any of this, ask the employees who'll actually experience it." The room grew quiet. A young supervisor frowned. "You mean they should help design it?" Ryan nodded. "They'll probably notice things we haven't." Elena smiled. "I can't believe we almost skipped that step." Ryan couldn't help smiling himself. Months ago, he would have focused on improving their proposal. Now, his first instinct was to broaden the conversation. It felt less impressive, and far more effective. Later that evening, Jasmine found Ryan reading in the living room. She curled up beside him with a mug of tea. "You look pleased." "I am. What happened?" He told her about the trainee meeting. "They had good ideas." "I'm sure they did. They reminded me of something." She waited. "I used to think leadership meant people coming to me for answers." He closed the book. "Now I think leadership is helping people trust their own thinking." Jasmine smiled warmly. "I don't think you've ever said anything more accurate." He laughed. "I would have argued with that version of myself a year ago." "I'm glad you don't have to anymore." A few days later, Thomas invited Ryan and Jasmine to lunch. His favorite neighborhood diner hadn't changed in decades. The booths were worn. The coffee was strong. The waitress still remembered everyone's usual order. After lunch arrived, Thomas looked across the table. "I've been watching both of you." Ryan smiled. "That sounds dangerous." Thomas chuckled. "It usually is." He turned toward Jasmine. "You've become an excellent CEO." She thanked him quietly. Then he looked at Ryan. "And you've become something just as important." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" Thomas leaned back. "The kind of person people aren't afraid to tell the truth." Ryan sat silently. His father continued, "When you were younger, people admired your confidence." He smiled gently. Now they trust your character. For Ryan, the words landed more deeply than any professional award ever had. Admiration had always felt good. Trust felt different. It carried responsibility. It had to be earned again and again, and unlike a title, it couldn't simply be handed to someone. Toward the end of January, the company received unexpected news. A national business magazine planned to feature Mitchell Freight Solutions in a special edition highlighting organizations with exceptional workplace cultures. A reporter spent 3 days interviewing employees at every level: warehouse workers, receptionists, drivers, executives, board members. When the interviews concluded, the reporter thanked Jasmine. "I've visited a lot of successful companies." Jasmine smiled. "So have I." He laughed. "But yours feels unusual." "In what way?" "I asked employees to describe leadership." He looked down at his notebook. Almost none of them mentioned authority. "What did they mention?" He smiled. "They talked about being heard." Jasmine glanced across the office where Ryan was speaking with 2 supervisors. A quiet smile crossed her face. That answer wasn't the result of one speech, or one policy. It had been built through hundreds of ordinary conversations. Conversations that slowly changed habits. Habits that slowly changed people. And people who, together, had changed an entire company. As the reporter packed his notes, he asked one final question. "If you had to describe your leadership philosophy in one sentence." Jasmine didn't answer immediately. She thought about the past year. The difficult conversations, the disappointments, the forgiveness, the steady, patient rebuilding of trust. Finally, she said, "I hope people leave every conversation with me believing their voice mattered." The reporter closed his notebook. "I think that's exactly what your employees have been trying to tell me all week." Jasmine looked through the glass wall toward Ryan. He was listening far more than he was speaking. She smiled to herself. Sometimes the greatest measure of influence isn't the number of people who follow your example. It's watching someone you love choose to live it, not because they were asked to, but because it has become part of who they are. A week after the reporter's visit, the article was published. Employees began forwarding it to one another before most people had finished their morning coffee. The headline wasn't about record profits. It wasn't about rapid expansion. It wasn't even about Jasmine becoming CEO. Instead, it read, "The company where listening became a competitive advantage." By lunchtime, clients had called to congratulate the leadership team. Former employees sent emails saying they recognized the culture described in the article. Even competing businesses reached out, asking if they could visit the headquarters to learn more about the company's approach. Jasmine appreciated the attention, but she also knew publicity had a way of creating unrealistic expectations. Recognition could inspire people. It could also tempt them to believe there was nothing left to improve. During the executive meeting that afternoon, David held up a printed copy of the article. "I think we should frame this." Several people laughed. Ryan smiled. "Why?" "Because it's good news." "It is," Ryan agreed. "But framed success has a strange habit." Melissa looked curious. "What do you mean?" "It reminds us of who we were." He looked around the room. "I'd rather spend our energy becoming who we're still capable of being." The room grew quiet. Harold smiled from the opposite end of the table. "I've noticed something." Everyone turned toward him. A year ago, Ryan would have been the one celebrating the article. Harold nodded toward Jasmine, and Jasmine would have been reminding everyone to stay focused. He chuckled softly. "Now they're both saying the same thing." Laughter spread through the room, not because Harold was making fun of them. A few days later, Jasmine received an email from the president of a nearby university. The business school wanted her to speak to graduating seniors about leadership. She accepted, though public speaking outside the company still made her nervous. The evening before the event, she sat at the dining room table surrounded by note cards. Ryan walked in carrying 2 mugs of tea. "How's the speech coming?" She sighed. "I've rewritten the opening 4 times. He sat beside her. "What's bothering you?" "I don't want to sound like I have everything figured out." Ryan smiled. "Then don't." She looked at him. "The students don't need perfection. They need honesty." She laughed. "You've started giving good advice." "I had a good teacher." She reached over and gently nudged his shoulder. "I wonder who that was." "I married her." The auditorium was nearly full the following afternoon. Graduating students, professors, and families filled the seats. Jasmine stood backstage taking a slow breath. The event organizer smiled. "Ready?" She nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be." When she reached the podium, applause welcomed her. She thanked the audience before beginning. "I've been asked to speak about leadership." She paused. "But I'd like to begin by talking about listening." The room became quiet. "When I started my career, I thought respect came from proving my value. She smiled. Over time, I discovered something different. People usually feel respected long before they feel impressed. Several students nodded as they wrote notes. She continued, titles may give you authority. They don't automatically earn trust. Trust grows through consistency, through humility, and through making people feel that their experiences matter. Near the front row, a young man raised his hand during the question session. If you could go back and give your younger self one piece of advice. Jasmine smiled. I'd tell her not to confuse being the quietest person in the room with having the smallest contribution. Another student asked, what's the hardest lesson you've learned? She thought for a moment. That the people who challenge your thinking are often the people helping you grow. The applause at the end of the event lasted longer than she expected. As students lined up to thank her, many mentioned the same thing. It felt real. For Jasmine, that compliment meant more than hearing she had given a great speech. Back at headquarters, Ryan spent the afternoon meeting with supervisors participating in the mentoring program. Near the end of the session, Elena remained behind. I wanted to ask something. Go ahead. She hesitated. How do you know when someone is ready for more responsibility? Ryan leaned back in his chair. I used to look for confidence. And now? I look for curiosity. She frowned thoughtfully. Why? Because confident people keep performing what they already know. He smiled. Curious people keep learning what they don't. Elena wrote the sentence in her notebook. I hope I never lose that. Ryan nodded. I hope none of us do. That evening, Jasmine returned home later than expected. Ryan was in the backyard trimming the rose bushes that lined the fence. She smiled as she walked toward him. I didn't know you had become a gardener. I haven't. He laughed. I'm experimenting. She looked at one of the bushes. It survived. So far. They walked slowly through the yard together. Winter was beginning to loosen its grip. Tiny green buds had started appearing on branches that had looked lifeless only weeks before. Jasmine stopped beside one of the roses. Look. Ryan leaned closer. The first new bloom. It always surprises me. What does? How something can look completely still, while it's quietly growing. Ryan looked at the small bud for a long moment. That sounds familiar. She smiled. It should. He slipped his hand into hers. You know, Ed, I used to think change happened because of one big decision. And now? I think it happens because of hundreds of ordinary ones. They continued walking without speaking. The garden didn't bloom overnight. Neither had their marriage. Both had required patience, care, attention, and the willingness to keep showing up, even on days when progress was difficult to see. Looking across the yard, Ryan realized the most meaningful transformations rarely announced themselves with dramatic moments. More often, they appeared quietly, like the first flower after winter, reminding those who had waited faithfully that steady care almost always bears fruit in its own time. Spring arrived with longer days and warmer mornings. The trees lining the streets around Mitchell Freight Solutions began filling with fresh green leaves, and employees found themselves lingering outside during lunch breaks instead of hurrying back indoors. The change in season seemed to bring a different kind of energy. People smiled a little more. Laughter carried farther through the hallways. Even the busiest days felt less heavy. One Monday morning, Jasmine stood by the large windows overlooking the distribution yard. Trucks rolled in and out with practiced precision. Forklifts moved steadily between loading docks. It looked almost effortless. She knew better. Behind every smooth operation were thousands of small decisions made well. Behind every successful team were relationships built over time. Success, she had learned, was rarely spectacular from the inside. It was usually the result of ordinary excellence repeated every day. Later that morning, Harold stopped by her office. I've received an interesting invitation. Jasmine looked up from her desk. Oh? A National Logistics Association is hosting a leadership conference. She nodded. They've asked Mitchell Freight Solutions to present a case study. That's wonderful. Harold smiled. They didn't ask for the CEO. She looked confused. They asked for both of you. Jasmine raised an eyebrow. Both? They're interested in the leadership transition. They want to understand how the company managed it without losing momentum. Jasmine leaned back in her chair. They're expecting a success story. Harold smiled knowingly. Then give them the real story. When Ryan heard about the invitation, he laughed. They want both of us? They do. I hope they're ready for a lot of honesty. Jasmine smiled. I think that's exactly why they invited us. They agreed to prepare the presentation together. Not as CEO and former CEO. Not as opposing perspectives, but as partners reflecting on what they had learned. For the next 2 weeks, they met after work in one of the smaller conference rooms. Their first attempt didn't go well. Ryan reviewed financial charts. Jasmine focused on cultural initiatives. The presentation felt disconnected. Ryan closed his laptop. "This isn't working." "No. It sounds like 2 separate speeches." Jasmine nodded. "Because we're telling people what happened." "What should we be doing?" She smiled. "We should tell them what changed." Ryan thought about that. That's a much better story. They started over. This time, they left the slides untouched. Instead, they wrote questions on a whiteboard. What assumptions did we have? Which ones were wrong? What surprised us? What would we do differently? For hours they talked. Sometimes they laughed. Sometimes they sat quietly, remembering difficult moments. Ryan looked at one question for a long time. "What surprised you most?" He answered honestly. "I thought losing my title would be the hardest part." Jasmine waited. "It wasn't." "What was?" "Realizing how often I had mistaken being respected for being listened to." She nodded slowly. "My biggest surprise was different." "What was yours?" "I thought becoming CEO would finally make people see me." Ryan looked at her carefully. "And?" She smiled gently. "I discovered the people who mattered most had been seeing me all along." He lowered his eyes. "I just wasn't one of them." She reached across the table and rested her hand over his. "You are, now?" The conference took place in Atlanta, 3 weeks later. Leaders from transportation companies across the country filled the convention center. As Ryan and Jasmine waited backstage, neither seemed nervous. Not because public speaking had become easy, because they weren't trying to impress anyone. They simply wanted to tell the truth. When they walked onto the stage, the moderator introduced them. "This is one of the most unusual leadership transitions we've studied." Ryan smiled. It certainly felt unusual. Laughter rippled through the audience. The moderator asked the first question. "What made your transition successful?" Jasmine answered first. "It wasn't successful because we avoided mistakes." She glanced toward Ryan. "It became successful because we finally started learning from them together." The audience nodded. Ryan continued. "I used to believe leadership was measured by how many people followed me." He smiled. "I've changed my definition." "What is it now?" "It's measured by how many people become stronger because you were part of their journey." Several attendees quietly wrote down the sentence. During the question and answer session, a CEO from another company stood. "What advice would you give someone struggling to let go of authority?" Ryan answered without hesitation. "Don't focus on letting go of authority." The room became still. "Focus on holding on to your purpose." He smiled. "If your purpose is bigger than your position, change becomes much less frightening." The audience applauded. Later, another executive asked Jasmine, "How did you avoid becoming bitter?" She reflected before answering. "I reminded myself that people often grow at different speeds." She looked toward Ryan. "If someone is willing to keep growing, I don't want to stop believing in them before they've had the chance." Ryan looked down for a moment. Those words carried more weight than anyone in the audience could fully understand. After the session ended, attendees gathered around to thank them. One executive approached quietly. "My business partner and I haven't spoken honestly in months." He smiled sadly. "I came expecting to learn about logistics." He laughed softly. "I think I learned more about relationships." Another attendee added, "I've never seen 2 leaders talk about mistakes without blaming each other." Jasmine smiled. "We've discovered blame rarely teaches what honesty can." On the flight home, Ryan looked out the airplane window as the sun began to set. The clouds glowed with soft shades of gold and orange. He turned toward Jasmine. "Can I ask you something?" She smiled. "You've become predictable." "I'll take that as a yes." She laughed. "What is it?" "If someone had told you 2 years ago that we'd be speaking together at a leadership conference, would you have believed them?" She thought for a moment. "No." "Why not?" "Because, back then, we were trying to prove ourselves to each other." She intertwined her fingers with his. "Now we're helping each other become better." Ryan smiled. The difference sounded simple. It wasn't. It had taken difficult conversations, honest reflection, countless small choices, and the courage to admit they had both been incomplete in different ways. As the airplane carried them home, neither of them spoke for several minutes. They didn't need to. Some journeys become meaningful not because of where they end, but because of who people become while traveling them together. Looking at the horizon beyond the window, Ryan realized that losing one chapter of his life had quietly opened the door to a much better one. And for the first time, he felt nothing but gratitude for the path that had led him there. The conference in Atlanta continued to generate conversations long after Ryan and Jasmine returned to Charlotte. Emails arrived from business owners. University professors requested copies of their presentation. Human resource directors asked whether members of the executive team could visit their organizations to discuss building healthier workplace cultures. Jasmine appreciated every message. Still, she reminded herself of something she had learned over the past year. Recognition was encouraging. Responsibility was lasting. If people were paying attention to Mitchell Freight Solutions, then the company needed to continue living the values it spoke about. The following Monday, Jasmine gathered the executive team. "I have one question." Everyone looked up from their notebooks. "What is one thing we've stopped noticing because it's become familiar?" The room was quiet. David broke the silence. "Our onboarding process." Melissa nodded. "We've improved leadership, but new employees still spend their first week buried in paperwork." Miguel added, "I think departments are communicating better." He paused. "But regional offices still feel disconnected from headquarters sometimes." Ryan listened without speaking. Finally, Jasmine looked toward him. "What do you think?" "I think success makes blind spots harder to see." She nodded. "Exactly. That's why we keep asking questions." Within an hour, they had identified several small improvements that had gone unnoticed simply because everyone had become accustomed to the way things had always been done. None of the changes were dramatic, yet together, they would make daily work a little easier for hundreds of employees. Later that week, Ryan received an unexpected visitor. It was Claire. She knocked gently on his office door. "Do you have a minute?" "Always." She stepped inside carrying a small gift bag. "I wanted to thank you." Ryan looked confused. "For what?" She smiled. "When my mom was in the hospital." "You checked in every Monday." He shrugged. "I wanted to know how she was doing." "You remembered?" "She had surgery scheduled." "That seemed important." Claire handed him the bag. "You didn't have to do that." "I know, but I wanted to." Inside was a simple ceramic mug. Printed across the front were the words, "People remember how you made them feel." Ryan smiled as he read it. "I'll use this every day." "I hoped you would." After she left, Ryan placed the mug on his desk. He didn't see it as a gift. He saw it as a reminder. The smallest habits often left the deepest impressions. Meanwhile, Jasmine spent the afternoon visiting one of the company's newest regional offices. Instead of scheduling formal presentations, she walked through each department introducing herself to employees she had never met. Near the warehouse entrance, she noticed a young employee struggling to organize incoming shipments. The employee looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry. I'm still learning." Jasmine smiled. "How long have you been here?" 2 weeks. "And how's it going?" The young man hesitated. Honestly, I've been afraid of asking too many questions." Jasmine nodded. "Why?" "I don't want people thinking I don't know what I'm doing." She smiled kindly. "May I tell you something?" He nodded. "The strongest employees I've met ask thoughtful questions." He looked surprised. "They do?" "They're more interested in learning than pretending." The young man relaxed. "I've had 6 questions all morning." Jasmine laughed. "Let's hear the first one." For the next 20 minutes, they walked through the warehouse discussing inventory systems, safety procedures, and scheduling. When they finished, the young employee smiled. "I feel a lot better." "I'm glad." "What changed?" He thought for a moment. "I stopped worrying about looking capable." And started focusing on becoming capable." Jasmine smiled. "That's a good place to start." That Friday evening, Ryan and Jasmine decided to leave work early. No meetings, no reports, no conference calls, just dinner at a small neighborhood restaurant they hadn't visited in years. The owner recognized them immediately. "It's been a long time." Ryan laughed. "Too long." They were seated by a window, overlooking a quiet street. For the first half hour, they talked about everything except work, books, travel, movies they still wanted to watch, family plans for the summer. At one point, Jasmine smiled. "You know what's funny?" "What?" "I don't think we've discussed quarterly revenue once." Ryan looked genuinely surprised. "We haven't." "There was a time we would have spent this entire dinner talking about the company." He nodded. "I remember." She reached for her glass. "I'm glad we remembered we're more than our jobs." Ryan looked at her thoughtfully. "I used to think balancing work and life meant giving equal hours to both. And now? I think it's about giving each the attention it deserves while you're there." She smiled. "So, when we're at work, we're fully present. And when we're here, We're fully here. He nodded. I think that's the goal. As they left the restaurant, they chose to walk home instead of driving. The evening air was warm, and the sidewalks were busy with families, couples, and neighbors enjoying the spring weather. They passed a small park, where children were playing, while parents watched from nearby benches. Ryan slowed his pace. I've been thinking about legacy. Jasmine looked at him. That's a big topic for a Friday night. He laughed. I know. I used to think legacy meant leaving behind a successful company. And now? He watched a father helping his young son learn to ride a bicycle. I think legacy is what continues in people after you've left the room. Jasmine followed his gaze. The father let go of the bicycle for just a moment. The little boy pedaled several feet on his own before realizing he was doing it. His face lit up with excitement. The father applauded from behind. He thinks he's doing it alone, Ryan said with a smile. Jasmine shook her head gently. No. He knows someone believed he could. They stood quietly, watching the child ride a little farther each time. Neither of them said another word. They didn't need to. Sometimes life's simplest moments explained the deepest lessons. As they continued their walk, Ryan realized that real leadership looked remarkably similar. It wasn't about keeping people dependent on your guidance. It was about encouraging them until they discovered they could move forward with confidence on their own. And perhaps that was the greatest gift anyone could leave behind. Not followers, but people who believed in themselves because someone had first believed in them. As spring gave way to early summer, Mitchell Freight Solutions prepared for another milestone. The company would celebrate its 30th anniversary. Planning committees formed across every department. Ideas filled conference rooms. Some employees suggested a formal banquet. Others proposed a large marketing campaign highlighting the company's growth over 3 decades. One team even recommended inviting former clients and business partners from across the country. When the proposals reached Jasmine's desk, she reviewed each one carefully. Then she looked up at the planning committee. May I ask a question? Of course. What do we want people to remember after the celebration? The room became thoughtful. Our history, one manager answered. Our success, another suggested. The people who built it, someone else added. Jasmine smiled. I like that answer. She closed the folder. Let's build the celebration around people. Instead of hosting only a formal dinner, the committee organized a week of events. Retired employees were invited back to share stories. Long-serving team members were recognized. Community partners were included. Families were welcomed to tour the headquarters. One afternoon was reserved for something called Stories That Shaped Us. Employees from every level of the company would have the opportunity to tell a short story about someone whose kindness or guidance had influenced their career. There were no awards attached, no prizes, only gratitude. The idea spread quickly throughout the company. Within days, every speaking slot had been filled. Ryan found himself unexpectedly nervous. He had agreed to share a story. The problem was choosing just one. As he sat in his office, he stared at a blank sheet of paper. There were countless people he could thank. His father, Marcus, David, warehouse employees who had challenged his assumptions, and Jasmine, especially Jasmine. He rubbed his forehead. One story, he whispered. How do I choose? A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Come in. Nathan stepped inside. I hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all. Nathan noticed the blank page. Speech? Ryan smiled. Unfortunately. Nathan laughed. I thought speaking got easier. It does. So what's the problem? Ryan looked down at the paper. I'm trying to decide who deserves the credit. Nathan smiled. Maybe that's why you're stuck. Ryan looked up. What do you mean? Maybe the point isn't choosing one person. He shrugged. Maybe it's showing how different people helped shape different parts of you. Ryan leaned back. I think you just solved my problem. The anniversary week arrived with excitement that could be felt from the front entrance. Historic photographs lined the hallways. Old delivery trucks were displayed outside the headquarters. Employees stopped frequently to laugh at hairstyles from decades earlier and uniforms that had long since been retired. Thomas wandered through the exhibits with quiet emotion. He paused in front of a faded photograph taken on opening day. The company had started with one warehouse. 3 trucks. 8 employees. Ryan joined him. You kept this picture? Thomas smiled. I've carried it through every office I've ever had. Ryan studied the faces. They all look so young. We all were. Thomas looked at the photo for another moment. You know what I remember most? What? Not opening the company. Ryan looked surprised. I remember wondering whether anyone would trust us enough to give us a chance. Ryan smiled. I've never heard that story. I didn't tell it often. Thomas folded his hands. When you're successful long enough. People forget you were once the beginner. Ryan quietly stored the sentence in his memory. That afternoon, employees gathered in the auditorium for stories that shaped us. The stage was simple. One chair, one microphone, no dramatic lighting, no elaborate production, just people sharing honest moments. A warehouse supervisor spoke first. He thanked the mechanic who had patiently taught him how to solve problems instead of hiding them. A dispatcher thanked the receptionist who had encouraged her to apply for a promotion years earlier. Claire spoke about co-workers who quietly covered her responsibilities while her mother recovered. There wasn't one heroic moment, she said. There were hundreds of ordinary acts of kindness. The audience applauded warmly. One after another, stories filled the room. Some were funny. Some brought tears. All of them carried the same message. People rarely remembered every meeting. They remembered how someone had made them feel during the moments that mattered. Finally, Ryan's name was announced. He walked to the stage carrying only a folded sheet of paper. He looked across the audience. For several seconds, he simply smiled. I spent a long time wondering whose story I should tell. Soft laughter rippled through the room. Then I realized my career has been shaped by too many people to choose only one. He looked toward the front row, where Thomas and Jasmine were seated. My father taught me that integrity matters more than reputation. Thomas lowered his eyes modestly. He turned toward another section. My colleagues taught me that good ideas can come from anywhere. He smiled at Nathan, Melissa, Miguel, David, and dozens of others. And my wife, his voice softened, taught me something I should have learned much earlier. The room grew still. She taught me that listening isn't something you do before speaking. He paused. It's one of the purest ways to show someone they matter. Ryan looked at Jasmine. I once believed leadership meant being the person everyone depended on. He smiled warmly. Today, I believe leadership means helping people discover they are stronger than they imagined. When he finished, the applause was steady and heartfelt. Not because it was a perfect speech, because it was an honest one. As Ryan returned to his seat, Jasmine reached for his hand. She didn't need to tell him how proud she was. Her smile said everything. For the first time since their journey had begun, neither of them felt defined by what had happened in the past. They felt grateful for what they had become because of it. And that gratitude, they realized, was one of the clearest signs that healing had finally found its home. The anniversary celebration concluded with a family picnic on the company grounds that Saturday afternoon. Children chased one another across the lawn while employees introduced spouses, parents, and grandparents to the co-workers they talked about at home. There were no reserved sections, no executive tables. Board members stood in line beside warehouse associates for barbecue and lemonade. Thomas watched the scene from beneath a large maple tree. This, he said quietly, isn't what I imagined 30 years ago. Harold smiled. What did you imagine? Thomas laughed. I was hoping we'd survive our first year. The two men watched employees laughing together. I never imagined we'd build something people would want their families to see. Ryan wandered through the picnic greeting people as they ate. Near one of the picnic tables, he noticed Elena speaking with her parents. She waved him over. Ryan, I'd like you to meet my mom and dad. He shook both of their hands. Her father smiled. We've heard a lot about you. Ryan laughed. I hope only the good parts. Elena's mother smiled. She tells us you ask more questions than anyone she's ever worked with. Ryan looked at Elena. I'll take that as a compliment. It is. Her father nodded. She used to come home thinking leadership meant having all the answers. He looked proudly at his daughter. Now she talks about understanding people first. Ryan smiled. I'm glad. As he walked away, he realized something. Lessons had a quiet way of continuing long after conversations ended. On the opposite side of the grounds, Jasmine sat with several retired employees. One of them, Margaret Collins, had worked in accounting for 27 years before retiring. She looked around at the crowd with misty eyes. I almost didn't come. Jasmine looked surprised. Why? Margaret smiled. I wasn't sure anyone would remember me. Jasmine reached across the table. Margaret. She gently squeezed her hand. Your work helped build this company. Margaret laughed softly. People usually remember the leaders. Jasmine shook her head. They should remember everyone. Margaret looked across the lawn where younger employees were laughing together. I spent years wondering if what I did mattered. It did. It still does. A peaceful silence settled between them. Sometimes the most meaningful reassurance came long after someone thought they needed it. As the afternoon drew to a close, a group of children gathered around one of the old delivery trucks displayed from the company's early years. Ryan's niece, Emma, tugged on his sleeve. Uncle Ryan? Yes? Did people really use this truck? He laughed. They certainly did. It looks tiny. It was. Thomas walked over, smiling. When we bought that truck, we thought it was enormous. Emma looked puzzled. Why didn't you buy a bigger one? Thomas knelt beside her. Because it was the biggest one we could afford. She thought about that. So you started small? Thomas nodded. We started with what we had. Emma smiled. That's how I learned to ride my bike. Ryan and Thomas exchanged a glance, before laughing together. Children had a remarkable way of finding simple truths adults often overlooked. The following Monday, the company returned to its normal rhythm. The decorations were gone. The exhibits had been packed away. Emails replaced celebration speeches. Yet something from the anniversary remained. Employees had started sharing more stories with one another. A new section appeared on the company intranet, where people posted messages thanking co-workers for everyday acts of kindness. One message read, "Thank you for staying late to help me finish inventory." Another said, "I appreciated you checking on me after my doctor's appointment." A driver thanked a dispatcher for patiently helping him navigate an unexpected road closure. None of the messages were dramatic. Together, they painted a picture of a workplace where appreciation had become a habit rather than an occasional event. Late that afternoon, David walked into Ryan's office carrying a printed page. "You've got to see this." Ryan looked up. "What is it?" David handed him the paper. It was one of the appreciation messages. It wasn't signed. It simply read, "The best thing about working here isn't that people notice when you succeed. It's that they notice when you're struggling." Ryan read it twice. Then he quietly placed it beside the ceramic mug on his desk. "That's worth keeping." "I thought you'd say that." That evening, Ryan and Jasmine left the office together just as the sun was beginning to set. Instead of heading straight to the parking lot, they walked slowly through the nearly empty warehouse. Forklifts had been parked. Loading docks were quiet. The building felt completely different without the constant movement of the workday. Ryan stopped near one of the loading bays. "I used to stand here thinking about shipments." Jasmine smiled. "What are you thinking about now?" He looked around the warehouse. "I'm thinking about names." She looked curious. "Names?" "I used to know departments." He paused. "Now I know people." Jasmine slipped her hands into the pockets of her coat. "That's a meaningful difference." "It really is." They continued walking until they reached the large entrance doors. Outside, the evening sky glowed with shades of orange and deep blue. Ryan turned toward Jasmine. "You know..." "What?" "I don't miss being CEO anymore." She searched his face, making sure he wasn't simply saying what she wanted to hear. He smiled. "I miss some responsibilities. I miss some challenges. But I don't miss the title." "What changed?" He looked out across the parking lot where the last few employees were heading home. "I stopped measuring my life by what was written on my office door." He turned back toward her. "I started measuring it by the relationships I get to walk out of that door with every evening." Jasmine's eyes softened. She took his hand as they walked toward their car. The headquarters behind them was only a building. Tomorrow, it would once again be filled with meetings, decisions, deadlines, and unexpected challenges. But what gave it meaning had never been the walls. It was the people inside them. And Ryan finally understood that the same was true of a marriage. The house they returned to each night was simply where they lived. The respect, patience, forgiveness, and quiet choice to keep showing up for one another, that was what made it a home. As the evening settled over the city, neither of them felt the need to revisit the pain that had brought them here. They carried it differently now, not as a burden that defined their future, but as a reminder of how far two people could grow when they chose understanding over pride, day after ordinary day. Summer arrived with its familiar rhythm of bright mornings and warm evenings. Mitchell Freight Solutions had entered one of the strongest years in its history, not because every challenge had disappeared, because people had learned how to face challenges together. The quarterly report reflected steady growth. Customer retention reached a company record. Employee engagement remained high. Yet the numbers that pleased investors the most weren't the ones Ryan found himself studying. He lingered over a different report. Internal promotions. More than 70% of leadership positions filled during the past year had gone to people already working inside the company. He smiled. The company wasn't simply growing. It was growing its people. One afternoon, Jasmine received a call from Human Resources. "We've got a situation." She smiled. "You always sound serious when you say that." "This one's a good situation." "Oh? The internship program. What about it?" "We've had more than 3,000 applications." Jasmine looked surprised. "That's nearly double last year." The article, the conference, and the anniversary celebration brought a lot of attention. She thought quietly for a moment. "Let's not choose only the strongest resumes." The HR director frowned. "What do you mean?" I want people who are willing to learn. Not just people who've already accomplished everything. The director smiled. I had a feeling you'd say that. A month later, 25 interns gathered in the headquarters auditorium for orientation. Some had recently graduated from college. Others were finishing graduate school. A few were changing careers entirely. The room buzzed with nervous excitement. Instead of beginning with company policies, Jasmine welcomed them with a simple question. How many of you are worried about making mistakes? Nearly every hand went up. She laughed softly. Good. The interns exchanged puzzled looks. If nobody raised a hand, I'd worry you weren't planning to challenge yourselves. The room relaxed. Ryan stepped forward. When I started leading people, I spent too much energy trying to avoid mistakes. He smiled. I've learned something better. Everyone waited. Notice them. Understand them. And don't waste them. Several interns immediately began writing. Ryan chuckled. That's worth remembering. After orientation, the interns toured the headquarters in small groups. One young woman named Maya lingered behind. She approached Jasmine cautiously. May I ask something? Of course. I've read articles about you. Jasmine smiled. I hope they were kind. They were. Maya hesitated. I was wondering. Did you ever feel like you had to work twice as hard just to be noticed? Jasmine answered honestly. Sometimes. What kept you going? She reflected for a moment. I stopped working to be noticed. Maya looked confused. I started working so that, if someone finally looked, they'd see consistency. The young woman smiled slowly. I needed to hear that. That afternoon, Ryan joined a small group of interns in the warehouse. Nathan was leading the tour. Halfway through the visit, one intern asked a question. What's the biggest mistake new leaders make? Nathan smiled. I know exactly who should answer that. Everyone looked toward Ryan. He laughed. You're putting me on the spot. You've earned it. Ryan folded his arms thoughtfully. The biggest mistake? He looked around the warehouse. I think it's believing leadership begins after someone gives you a title. The interns listened carefully. It doesn't. It begins the first time someone trusts you. And trust isn't limited to managers. He pointed toward a veteran mechanic helping a new employee adjust a piece of equipment. See that? Everyone turned. That's leadership. No title required. The interns watched quietly. Sometimes, the simplest examples were the hardest to forget. Near the end of the internship's first week, Maya knocked on Ryan's office door. You have a minute? Always. She stepped inside holding a notebook. I've filled almost half of this already. Ryan smiled. Good sign. She laughed. I've noticed something. What's that? Everyone here asks questions. He nodded. They do. Even senior executives. They do. I've never worked somewhere people seemed comfortable admitting they didn't know everything. Ryan leaned back in his chair. Can I tell you a secret? She smiled. Please. The smartest people I've met aren't the ones with the quickest answers. He paused. They're the ones who never stop being students. Maya closed her notebook. I think that's why this place feels different. Ryan smiled. I think you're beginning to understand our culture. That evening, Ryan and Jasmine sat on the back porch with glasses of iced tea as the sun settled low across the neighborhood. The air carried the scent of freshly cut grass. For a while, they simply watched the quiet street. Finally, Ryan spoke. Do you remember the night I lost the CEO position? Jasmine looked at him gently. I do. I thought my life was ending. She reached for his hand. I remember that too. He smiled. It's strange. What is? I can barely recognize that version of myself. She looked at him with quiet warmth. That's because you've grown. He shook his head. So have you. She laughed softly. I hope we never stop. Ryan looked toward the horizon where the last light of the day faded into the evening sky. I don't think growth has a finish line. Jasmine smiled. I think you're right. For a few peaceful moments, neither of them spoke. They no longer felt the need to measure how far they had come. They were too busy living the life they had patiently rebuilt together. The promotions, awards, articles, and conferences had all been meaningful in their own way. But none of them compared to the quiet confidence they now shared. A confidence rooted not in titles or achievements, but in the knowledge that when life inevitably changed again, as it always does, they would face it the way they had learned to face everything else. Together, listening first, respecting always, growing, one ordinary day at a time. The final quarter of the year arrived almost unnoticed. Life had settled into a rhythm that no longer felt extraordinary. There were meetings to attend, problems to solve, birthdays to celebrate, New employees to welcome, veteran employees to thank. The company continued moving forward, one ordinary day after another. And somehow, Ryan had come to understand that ordinary days were where the most meaningful parts of life were lived. One Thursday morning, Jasmine received an email from Harold Whitmore. "Would you and Ryan join me in the boardroom this afternoon? Nothing urgent, just something I'd like to discuss." She smiled. Harold's messages were always brief. Ryan met her outside the boardroom, just before 3 o'clock. "You think we're in trouble?" Jasmine laughed. If we were, Harold would have written a much longer email. They entered together. Thomas was already there, along with the rest of the board. Harold welcomed them with a warm smile. "Please, have a seat." After everyone settled, he folded his hands. "This isn't a formal meeting." Ryan looked curious. "Then what is it?" Harold glanced around the room. "Reflection." He stood and walked toward the large window overlooking the headquarters. "When I joined this board, I hoped we'd leave this company stronger than we found it." He turned back toward everyone. "We have." He picked up a folder. "Revenue has grown. Customer retention is excellent. Leadership development is stronger than it's ever been." He closed the folder again. "But those aren't the numbers I'm proudest of." Ryan leaned forward. "What are they?" Harold smiled. "The number of employees who recommend this company to friends. The number who stay because they feel valued. The number who believe their opinions matter." He looked at Jasmine. "Culture doesn't appear on a balance sheet, but it affects every line on one." Thomas slowly stood. "I'd like to say something." The room immediately became quiet. "When Ryan was a little boy, he followed me everywhere." Ryan smiled. "I remember." Thomas laughed. "You asked questions all day. Why this? Why that? How does this work?" The room chuckled. Then, somewhere along the way, "You stopped asking questions." Ryan lowered his eyes thoughtfully. "I did." Thomas smiled gently. "I'm glad you've started asking them again." For a moment, no one spoke. Ryan finally looked up. "So am I." After the meeting ended, most of the board members headed home. Ryan and Jasmine remained behind. The afternoon sunlight stretched across the empty boardroom. Ryan looked at the chair where he had once sat as CEO. "I thought this room represented success." Jasmine stood beside him. "What do you think now?" He smiled. "I think it represents responsibility. And responsibility changes hands." She nodded. "It should." He looked at her. "I don't envy your position anymore." She laughed softly. "Good. I respect it. And that's much healthier." They both smiled. A few weeks later, the company hosted its annual leadership recognition ceremony. Unlike previous years, employees had nominated one another. The award categories reflected the culture they had built together. Outstanding mentor, quiet problem solver, everyday encouragement, collaboration champion. The stories shared before each award mattered more than the trophies themselves. One recipient had spent months helping a coworker prepare for a certification exam. Another quietly organized meal deliveries for an employee recovering from surgery. A dispatcher was recognized for staying after every shift to help new hires feel comfortable. None of those acts appeared in performance reviews. Yet, everyone understood they were helping define the company. As the final award concluded, Harold stepped to the microphone. "I've attended many ceremonies over the years." He smiled. "This is the first one where kindness received as much applause as achievement." The audience stood together in a long ovation, not for one person, for one another. That evening, Ryan and Jasmine drove home with the windows down. The autumn air felt familiar. "So," Jasmine asked, "what are you thinking about?" Ryan smiled. "You ask me that a lot." "Occupational habit." He laughed. "I've been thinking about the first year after you became CEO." She nodded quietly. "If I could go back, I wouldn't try to change what happened." She looked at him with surprise. "You wouldn't?" He shook his head. "I'd change how I responded." He paused. "But if none of it had happened, I might never have become the husband I wanted to be." Jasmine reached over and rested her hand on his. "I've been thinking about something too." "What?" "There was a time when I believed respect had to be demanded." She looked out the windshield. "I've learned it's much more powerful when it's practiced." Ryan smiled. "I think we've both learned that." Several days later, Ryan arrived home carrying a small package. Jasmine looked up from the kitchen. "What's that?" "I found something." He handed her the wrapped box. She opened it carefully. Inside was the old notebook he had carried for months. The pages were worn. The corners had softened from constant use. She looked confused. "You already own this." He nodded. I do. She opened the cover. On the first page, beneath the original title, Things I Don't Want to Forget, he had written one final entry. The people closest to us should never have to compete with our ambition for our attention. Jasmine read the sentence twice. When she looked up, Ryan was smiling. I wanted that to be the last lesson. Tears filled her eyes. I think it's the most important one. She closed the notebook and hugged him. Neither hurried to speak. Some moments were complete exactly as they were. Months later, visitors walking through the headquarters often paused near a framed quote displayed in the lobby. Employees smiled whenever they noticed newcomers reading it. There was no author's name beneath it. No title. Just a single sentence. People may remember the position you held, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. New employees often asked where the quote had come from. No one answered exactly the same way. Some said it reflected the company's culture. Others believed it summarized the leadership philosophy of Mitchell Freight Solutions. Ryan and Jasmine always smiled when they heard those conversations, because they knew something most people didn't. The quote wasn't the ending of their story. It was simply a reminder to keep living it. Years earlier, Ryan had believed success meant reaching the top. He eventually discovered that standing at the top meant very little if the people beside him felt unseen. Jasmine had always understood that respect could not be forced. It had to be earned through consistency, humility, and genuine care. Together, they learned that love worked the same way. Not through grand declarations, not through perfect moments, but through the daily decision to listen before assuming, to understand before judging, and to value one another beyond titles, accomplishments, or recognition. Their journey had never been about a promotion. It had been about perspective. And in the end, the greatest change wasn't that Jasmine became CEO. It was that Ryan finally saw the extraordinary woman who had been standing beside him all along. From that day forward, neither of them measured success by who stood at the top. They measured it by how many people left their presence feeling respected, encouraged, and valued. Because they had discovered a simple truth that would guide both their marriage and their company for years to come. The strongest leaders build successful organizations. The wisest leaders build successful people. And the happiest marriages are built the very same way. As Ryan and Jasmine's journey comes to an end, we'd love to hear from you. What was the biggest lesson you took away from their story? Was it about listening, respecting the people you love, letting go of pride, or believing that people can truly grow? Share your thoughts in the comments. We read every one of them, and your perspective might encourage someone else who needs it today. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next inspiring story here on Love Stories by Mr. Johnson. Remember, the strongest relationships aren't built by perfect people. They're built by people who choose to keep learning, keep listening, and keep showing up for each other every single day. Thank you for spending this journey with us. We'll see you in the next story.